Tonight we turn our gaze not to the battlefields of kings or the gilded halls of queens, but to a far quieter, more intimate struggle. We slip through the heavy oaken doors of an ancient monastery to sit with a monk who once sought God in prayer and parchment, but found something stranger, something more profound and terrifying in the deep watches of the night. His is a tale not of conquest, but of quiet revelation, of faith lost and a different kind of knowing gained, in a world where unseen forces hum just beyond the edge of perception. So, before you draw your covers close and let the chill of the stone and the hum of ancient secrets settle around you, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy the medieval stories we share here. And let us know in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is in your part of the world. It's always strangely comforting to see who else is out there, falling asleep to the same subtle echoes of history. Now dim the lamps, let the silence gather, and let the story unfold. The final bell of Compline had long since faded, swallowed by the rising tide of night. I sat by the window in my cell, not praying, merely watching the last bruised streaks of amethyst and rose bleed out of the western sky. Below, the courtyard, usually a bustling hive of murmuring brothers and clattering chores, was now a still pool of shadow. A lone owl, a silent hunter, swept across the darkening stone, its silhouette briefly eclipsing the last star that dared to show its face. The air grew heavy, thick with the damp chill that seeped from the mountain stone and clung to the rough wool of my habit. It was a cold that found its way not just to the bone, but to the spirit, settling there like an unwelcome guest. I knew this cold, had known it for many winters, each one feeling longer than the last. It was the same cold that permeated the ancient scriptures I copied day after day, the same chill that seemed to emanate from the very altar during Matin. Tonight, it felt particularly acute, a sharp reminder of the world's indifference, even to those who knelt. I am Brother Thomas, though the name means little now. Here, names are shed like old skins, replaced by the collective anonymity of the order. I have lived within these monastery walls for 20 years, longer than I had lived outside them. 20 years of bells marking the hours, of parchment rustling under my hand, of prayers murmured until the words lost all meaning and became only sound, like the drone of a summer bee. Tonight, the silence that followed the last bell felt different. It wasn't the familiar, comforting hush of devotion that once filled these halls, a quiet promise of celestial presence. No, tonight it was a vast, empty space, an echo of something that had departed, leaving only a hollow chamber where warmth and certainty once resided. My breath plumed lightly in the frigid air of the cell, a transient wisp of vapor, much like the faith that had once burned so brightly within me. It was a dying ember now, flickering weakly against the encroaching darkness. I pressed my forehead against the cold stone of the window frame, the chill a welcome sharpness against the dull ache behind my eyes. The world outside the monastery walls was a vast, unknown wilderness, a dark forest that stretched to the very edges of comprehension. And sometimes, in the deep quiet of the night, it felt as though that wilderness was seeping inward, claiming even the sanctuary of our hallowed halls one cold, indifferent stone at a time. The distant howls of a wolf pack, carried on a gust of wind, only served to deepen the profound sense of isolation. They say that faith is a fire, passed from generation to generation, stoked by prayer and kindled by miracle. But for me, the embers have long since cooled, leaving only ash. It began subtly, years ago, like a slow erosion of a riverbank. A question here, a doubt there, each one a tiny stone dislodged from the bedrock of my belief. I would read the ancient texts, tracing the elegant Latin script, the words speaking of divine purpose and celestial love. But my heart remained unmoved. The suffering I witnessed, the famines that swept through the villages beyond our walls, the plagues that sometimes reached even our hallowed halls, taking brothers and laymen alike with brutal indifference. None of it seemed to reconcile with the benevolent hand of the Almighty they preached. I saw young children, faces gaunt and eyes feverish, die with prayers on their lips, while men of cruel heart and gluttonous belly flourished. Where was the justice in that? Where was the divine plan? Each time a plague struck or a harvest failed, I would pray fervently at first, then with a growing desperation, and finally with a hollow, mechanical recitation. The words tasted like dust in my mouth, and the silence that followed was not the quiet of God's listening, but the profound, echoing emptiness of an unheeding sky. I would watch the older brothers, their faces etched with lines of devotion and unquestioning certainty, and wonder if their prayers truly reached higher than the smoke from our hearth. Did they feel the same chill when they knelt? Did the promises of paradise seem as distant and ephemeral as the morning mist? Or was I simply broken, a vessel incapable of holding the sacred one? The monastery routine, once a comforting anchor, had become a relentless grind. The hours of quiet contemplation, the chanting of psalms, the meticulous copying of scriptures, all transformed into a repetitive, soul-numbing ritual. My hands moved across the parchment, forming perfect letters, illuminating intricate margins, but my mind drifted, seeking answers in the patterns of dust motes dancing in the faint light, in the subtle shifts of the wind against the stone. I questioned not the existence of God, for the very act of questioning felt like a rebellion against the ingrained habit of a lifetime, but his nature. Was he truly merciful, or merely indifferent? A distant craftsman who had set the world in motion, then turned his gaze elsewhere, leaving humanity to flounder in its own misery. The thought was a dangerous one, a poison that seeped into the deepest corners of my mind, staining every sacred thought, every familiar prayer. Tonight, as the last vestiges of twilight vanished and the true darkness of the mountain night descended, the silence felt particularly profound, less a space for reflection and more like a vast, unfillable void. The first bell for matins rung by old Brother Anselm tolled through the pre-dawn darkness, a hollow clang that rattled the very stones of the monastery. It was still hours before the sun would even consider gracing us with its presence, and the air was thick with a biting cold that only truly arrives in the deep watches of the night. I rose from my straw pallet, the rustling of hay a familiar, slightly irritating soundtrack to my reluctant awakening. My joints ached, a deep, persistent throb that seemed to be a constant companion these days. I was not yet old, but the endless hours hunched over the scriptorium table, the damp chill of the stone walls, and the unyielding hardness of my bed had conspired to turn my body into a creaking, protesting vessel. Around me, other brothers stirred, their groans and coughs a low symphony in the communal sleeping hall. There was no privacy here, no quiet corner to collect one's thoughts before facing the chill. We were a tightly packed cluster of bodies, huddled together for warmth, a strange, tangled knot of humanity in the vast, indifferent darkness. The air smelled of damp wool, unwashed bodies, and the faint, sour tang of stale breath. It was a familiar smell, the scent of shared endurance, a scent that had long since ceased to register as unpleasant. It was simply the smell of living, of surviving another night. I pulled my rough wool habit tighter around me, the coarse fabric doing little to fend off the deep cold that had burrowed into the very marrow of my bones. Barefoot, I padded across the stone floor, the icy contact a sharp jolt that banished any lingering tendrils of sleep. The chapel, its ancient stones colder still, awaited. We would gather there, a huddle of dark figures murmuring prayers into the vast empty space, our voices thin and reedy in the profound silence. The ritual was ancient, unchanging, a testament to centuries of devotion. But tonight, as I knelt, the familiar ache in my knees was not matched by any warmth in my soul. My mind remained a blank canvas, impervious to the sacred words, untouched by the echoes of faith that once filled this hallowed space. I simply existed, a quiet figure in a quiet hall waiting for the hours to pass, waiting for the sun to rise, waiting for something, anything, to break the profound, unchanging monotony of existence within these cold, hard walls. The air, heavy with the scent of unlit beeswax candles and ancient dust, seemed to press down, a silent, weighty presence. The scriptorium was a sanctuary, and sometimes a prison. In the deep hours of the night when the rest of the monastery was sunk in the profound silence of true sleep, I found myself drawn there, not for devotion, not for piety, but for the quiet, rhythmic scrape of my quill across parchment, the only sound to break the oppressive stillness. A single tallow lamp, its flame a shaky, reluctant beacon, cast long, dancing shadows across the high stone walls, making the familiar gargoyles carved into the arches seem to leer and writhe in the dim light. The air was thick with the scent of aged parchment, ink, and the faint metallic tang of cold stone. It was a smell I knew better than my own name, a constant companion through countless nights. I was copying a treatise on the nature of celestial bodies, a work of profound theological speculation, filled with intricate diagrams of spheres and orbits. My hand moved with practiced ease, forming the delicate Gothic script, each letter a tiny, perfect piece of art. But my mind was far from the celestial. It drifted, snagged on a stray thought, a question, a memory. The words flowed from the tip of my quill, proclaiming God's infinite wisdom and perfect order. Yet outside, the world was a vast, chaotic wilderness, and my own soul felt utterly devoid of any such divine harmony. The meticulous work was a strange form of meditation. Each stroke, each carefully measured line demanded a focus that pushed all other thoughts aside. For a time I could lose myself in the rhythm, becoming one with the rustle of the parchment, the whisper of the quill, the faint, persistent smell of ink. It was a small, fragile respite from the relentless gnawing of doubt that had become my constant companion. I worked until my fingers cramped, until the inkwell seemed to blur before my eyes, until the single tallow lamp sputtered, its flame shrinking to a desperate point of light, threatening to plunge the scriptorium into complete darkness. In those moments I would lift my head, my eyes aching from the strain, and gaze into the inky blackness that pressed against the window. Sometimes I imagined I saw things out there. A flicker of unnatural light in the distant forest, a shadow moving too swiftly across the snow-covered peaks, a form that was not quite beast, not quite man. My mind, weary and overwrought, often played such tricks. But tonight, the imagined flicker seemed almost real, a subtle pinprick of something unholy against the vast canvas of the night, too distant to be certain, too persistent to ignore. It was like a silent, waiting eye in the darkness. A profound restlessness, a quiet unease, settled upon me as the hours deepened. The chill in the scriptorium, despite my efforts to stoke the small brazier, seemed to intensify, wrapping around me like a shroud. The faint flicker of light in the distant forest, glimpsed through the window, would not leave my mind. It was a phantom, perhaps, a trick of the eye. But it pulled at me with an insistent, unspoken promise of something beyond the familiar. I knew I should return to my cell, seek the brief solace of a second sleep before the dawn. But a strange compulsion urged me outward, past the heavy oak door of the scriptorium, through the cold, echoing corridors of the monastery. My footsteps, usually hushed and almost imperceptible, seemed to echo too loudly in the profound silence. Each creak of the ancient timbers, each whisper of the wind through an unseen crack, seemed amplified, imbued with a strange, watchful quality. I walked past the sleeping hall, a low symphony of snores and murmurs, past the refectory, its long tables like silent, waiting skeletons in the dark. I found myself in the inner courtyard, the bitter night air a sharp shock against my face. Here the darkness was absolute, relieved only by the faint silvering of frost on the stone and the distant, unblinking stars. The chapel loomed to my right, a massive, unmoving presence, its windows like blind eyes staring into the void. But it was the outer gate that drew me. Not the main gate, which was barred and bolted, but a smaller, seldom used postern. A humble archway set into the monastery's perimeter wall, leading to a narrow path that wound down into the valley. It was used only for collecting herbs or tending to the small, neglected orchard in the warmer months. Tonight, however, it seemed to hum with a quiet invitation. I unlatched the heavy wooden bolt, the metallic rasp of iron against wood impossibly loud in the stillness. The cold that rushed in was not merely air, but a tangible presence, a vast, ancient breath from the world beyond. And then I saw it. Not a flicker now, but a soft, persistent glow, low in the valley, nestled amongst the black silhouette of the tree. It was a color I did not recognize, neither firelight nor the cold gleam of the moon. It was a deep, unsettling blue, pulsing gently, like a hidden heart. My breath caught in my throat, a sudden, desperate gasp in the profound silence. The forest, a silent sentinel, seemed to hold its breath, watching. The blue light pulsed, a steady, hypnotic rhythm against the backdrop of the impenetrable forest. It wasn't the harsh, devouring blue of a lightning strike, nor the ethereal glow of a distant phantom. No, this was something deeper, richer, a color that seemed to hum with an inner life. It was a hue I had never encountered, a blue that defied the natural world, and it held me transfixed, rooted to the cold stone of the postern entrance. My mind, usually a chaotic battlefield of doubt and unanswered prayers, fell utterly silent. There was only the light and the profound, watchful stillness of the night. I took a hesitant step outside the gate, then another. The gravel crunched under my bare feet, a sound like shattered glass in the immense quiet. The air grew colder, but I barely noticed. My senses narrowed to that singular, pulsing blue. It seemed to draw me not with force, but with a quiet, insistent promise of something utterly foreign, yet strangely compelling. The path, usually familiar even in darkness, now felt alien, each gnarled root and shadowed stone imbued with a strange, waiting quality. I moved slowly, drawn deeper into the embrace of the valley, away from the familiar, cold comfort of the monastery walls. The light seemed to grow, not in intensity, but in presence, filling the space around it, illuminating the nearest tree trunks with its strange, unnatural glow. And then I saw the source. It was not a fire, nor a burning bush. It was a pool, nestled in a small clearing, no larger than a horse trough, and within it, suspended, was a single perfect sphere of that same impossible blue. It floated, utterly still, emitting the gentle rhythmic pulse, like a living, breathing jewel. Around the pool the air shimmered, and a faint, sweet scent, like crushed herbs and distant rain, hung heavy. I knelt by the edge of the pool, my hand hovering, hesitant, over the glowing sphere. The heat that emanated from it was not fire-hot, but a deep, comforting warmth that seeped into my chilled fingers, a stark contrast to the pervasive cold of the night. It felt ancient, yet impossibly new, and as I gazed into its depths, I saw things, not images, not pictures, but a kaleidoscope of shifting impressions, a vast, unseeing eye, a cosmic dance of distant stars, a whisper of a language I did not understand, yet somehow recognized. It was a silent conversation, a profound communication that bypassed my intellect and spoke directly to something deep within my soul. The sphere pulsed again, a slow, gentle throb that resonated through the very ground. And in that moment, all my doubts, all my questions, all my fading faith seemed to dissolve, replaced by a profound, terrifying wonder. The ancient texts of our order speak of signs. They tell of burning bushes, of voices from the clouds, of stars that guide kings. They speak of the divine revealing itself in thunder and fire, in the grand, unmistakable pronouncements of a fearsome god. But the sphere, pulsing softly in the clearing, offered no thunder, no fire, no voice. It was a quiet revelation, a silent hum against the vast indifference of the night, and it defied every interpretation I had ever been taught. Our learned brothers, the ones who spent their lives dissecting scripture and interpreting omens, would have sought a familiar explanation. They would have called it a demon, a trick of the old one, a temptation veiled in beauty, or perhaps, in a moment of great piety, a manifestation of a saint, a subtle blessing. But I, who had long since lost the language of faith, could find no comfort in these familiar categories. The sphere felt neither holy nor unholy, neither good nor evil. It simply was a raw, unfiltered presence that whispered of truths far older than any scripture, far stranger than any prophecy. I thought of the long hours spent in the scriptorium, meticulously copying descriptions of angels with flaming swords and seraphim with countless eyes. Yet here, in the heart of the forest, was something more profound than any painted vision. Its silent message was not one of judgment or salvation, but of connection. A deep resonant hum that seemed to bind all things. The cold earth beneath my knees, the ancient trees that watched from the shadows, the distant unblinking stars and the terrified wondering breath in my own chest. It felt like the very fabric of existence, revealed in a single impossible orb. My hand, still hovering above the sphere, trembled. Not from fear, but from the sheer, overwhelming weight of an unspeakable understanding. The subtle currents of energy that emanated from it felt like cool water seeping into my parched soul, quenching a thirst I hadn't even known I possessed. My faith, that dying ember, had offered structure, rules, a promise of meaning. But this offered something else entirely. A terrifying, beautiful glimpse into the raw, indifferent majesty of a cosmos that did not care for prayers or penance, but simply existed, vast and unfathomable. It was a truth that shattered the old world, leaving only a new, unsettling silence in its wake. How could I ever return to the familiar rituals, the comforting chants, the simple certainties, now that I had seen this impossible blue? The weight of this knowing, or perhaps of not knowing what it was, settled upon me like a cloak made of starlight and dread. The warmth from the sphere, subtle yet insistent, seeped into my body, chasing away the pervasive chill that had been my constant companion. It was a sensation akin to the fleeting comfort of a fever breaking, leaving behind a strange lightness, a sense of having shed a great burden. As I knelt by the pool, the impossible blue pulsating gently, memories, long buried beneath layers of duty and despair, began to surface. I remembered the first famine, years ago, when the crops withered in the fields and the prayers for rain went unanswered. I remembered the gaunt faces of the villagers, their eyes fixed on the empty sky, their faith eroding with each passing day of drought. We had preached patience, divine will, God's mysterious plan, but their bellies were empty, and their children cried. Then came the red fever, sweeping through the valleys like a scythe. Brothers strong and pious fell to its embrace. I remembered Brother Elias, his skin flushed and his breathing ragged, whispering psalms until his last breath, his eyes wide with a desperate, unblinking faith. I had sat by his side, holding his trembling hand, praying alongside him, begging for mercy, for a sign, for anything to ease his suffering. But the mercy never came, only the cold, silent grip of death. And after he was gone, after we had buried him in the frozen earth, my prayers felt like empty words, rattling around in a hollow chest. I remembered the quiet desperation in the eyes of the laymen who came to confession, their sins often born of hunger or cold, or the simple brutal necessities of survival. They sought absolution, a promise of a better afterlife, a balm for the raw wounds of their earthly existence. We offered them words, rituals, penance. But what solace could words offer to a man whose child starved, or a woman whose husband lay broken in the fields? The church offered hope, but the world offered only relentless hardship. The sphere continued its gentle hum, and the memories seemed to soften, to lose their sharp, painful edges. It wasn't erasing them, but transforming them, presenting them not as failures of faith, but as simple facts, of existence in a vast, indifferent cosmos. The suffering was not a test, nor a punishment, but merely the natural consequence of being, of living within the endless, intricate dance of creation and decay. There was no judgment, no divine plan, only the ceaseless turning of the wheel. And in that profound, terrifying realization, there was a strange, unsettling peace. My intellectual doubts, those tiny stones that had dislodged my faith, now seemed insignificant. The sphere offered no answers in words, but a silent, resonant understanding that bypassed words entirely, settling deep within the marrow of my bones. It was a strange kind of comfort, the kind that comes from knowing you are truly alone in the vastness, and that perhaps that is enough. The blue light in the clearing began to soften, its impossible hue subtly shifting, hinting at the approaching dawn. The air, though still holding the deep chill of the night, carried a new scent, the sharp, clean smell of frost thawing on pine needles, and the faint, stirring breath of the earth awakening. The stars above, once so fiercely bright, now seemed to dim, receding into the vast canvas of the sky, preparing for the arrival of the sun. The gentle hum from the sphere remained, but it too seemed to whisper, a quiet farewell as its strange magic prepared to yield to the familiar light of day. I rose from my kneeling position, my legs stiff, but my spirit strangely light, as if a great weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The path back to the monastery, previously shadowed and alien, now felt clearer, less intimidating. I walked slowly, my bare feet still cold against the gravel, but the chill no longer seeped into my soul. The air filled with the first tentative chirps of unseen birds, a thin, reedy chorus against the vast silence. Soon the distant, familiar clang of the bells would shatter the Provence quiet, marking the hour for prime, calling the brothers to prayer. The monastery would stir, a slow awakening of murmurs and the rustle of habit. As I approached the postern gate, the first pale gray light was already bleeding into the eastern sky, painting the mountain peaks with a cold, almost surgical precision. The rough stone walls of the monastery, which had seemed so imposing and unyielding in the deep night, now looked merely old, worn by countless winters and centuries of human touch. The smoke from the hearth, a thin, hopeful plume, already curled into the pre-dawn air, a promise of warmth, of routine, of another day of existence. I slipped back through the gate, the heavy wooden bolt rasping shut behind me with a familiar, comforting finality. The inner courtyard, still steeped in shadow, felt different now, no longer a prison, but simply a place. The chapel, its ancient stones cold and silent, stood waiting. I knew its rituals, its chants, its prayers. I knew the words that would be spoken, the gestures that would be made. But the profound, unsettling wonder of the blue light, the silent communication from the impossible sphere, had changed something fundamental within me. It was a secret I would carry, a burden that was also a strange kind of freedom. The ordinary world was returning, but I was not the same man who had stepped into the dark night. The hum of the sphere still resonated deep within my bones, a quiet, resonant truth that would continue to whisper long after the memory of the impossible blue had faded from my waking eye. The sun rose, painting the eastern sky with the familiar, unapologetic blaze of gold and rose. It streamed through the narrow, high windows of the chapel, illuminating the motes of dust, dancing in the frigid air, bathing the worn altar in a light that felt both ancient and utterly new. The brothers gathered, a huddle of dark figures, their voices a low murmur, as they began the familiar chants of prime. My own voice joined the chorus, a thin, reedy sound, indistinguishable from the other. My hands clasped together, my knees pressed against the cold stone of the floor, my eyes fixed on the crucifix that hung above the altar. All the outward motions were the same, a seamless continuation of the life I had known for 20 years. But inside, something had irrevocably shifted. The profound silence that had followed the bell of Compline now seemed to hold a different meaning, less an empty void and more a vast, unfillable space where an unspeakable truth resided. The hunger for meaning, the gnawing questions that had consumed me for so long, had not been answered, not in the way the scriptures promised or the priests preached. Instead, they had been replaced by something stranger, something more profound than any revelation contained in words. The silent hum of the blue sphere, the kaleidoscope of impressions it had imparted, resonated deep within my marrow, a new, unsettling understanding that permeated every fiber of my being. I felt a quiet detachment, a sense of standing slightly apart from the rituals, the prayers, the unquestioning faith of my brothers. They sought salvation, forgiveness, a divine hand to guide them through the turbulent currents of earthly life. They believed in a God who listened, who judged, who intervened. I now carried the burden, or perhaps the gift, of knowing a different truth, a cosmos of vast, indifferent majesty, a universe that simply was beyond the petty concerns of human sin or salvation. The sphere had offered no comfort in the traditional sense, no promise of paradise, no balm for the soul. But in its profound, silent presence, it had offered a terrifying, beautiful glimpse into the raw, unadorned fabric of existence. As the chants continued, filling the chapel with their ancient rhythm, I realized that my faith had not returned. It had been replaced. Not by a void, not by a bitter emptiness, but by a quiet, unsettling knowledge, a secret hum that would now accompany me through every waking hour, every core, every silent moment of contemplation. The familiar world still existed, its cold stone, its daily rhythms, its unquestioning beliefs. But I, Brother Thomas, now walked within it as a stranger, carrying the echo of an impossible blue, a truth that defied every word, every prayer, every symbol. The monk who had lost his faith had not found God, but something stranger, something deeper, something that resonated with the profound, indifferent beauty of the vast, unseeing cosmos. And with the rising sun, I began my new, solitary journey into that strange and silent knowing. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm both familiar and profoundly alien. The bells still tolled, sharp and insistent, tearing holes in the fabric of quiet contemplation. My hands still moved across the parchment in the scriptorium, meticulously forming the elegant loops and flourishes of the Latin script. The taste of pottage at meager meals remained bland, the chill of the stone floors a constant presence. On the surface I was Brother Thomas, the quiet, diligent scribe, a familiar fixture in the monastery's ancient walls. But beneath the rough wool of my habit, a silent internal revolution was unfolding. The world had shifted, not outwardly, but within the chambers of my own perception. Each morning, as the first rays of sunlight pierced the high chapel windows, bathing the dust motes in a fleeting golden dance, I felt a strange disjunction. The sun, once a symbol of divine blessing, now seemed merely a distant, indifferent star, going about its cosmic dance with a cold, elegant precision. The crucifix, hanging heavy and still above the altar, no longer represented a suffering savior, but a simple wooden form, carved by human hands, imbued with meaning by human belief. The chanting of the Psalms, once a comforting tide of devotion, now sounded like a mechanical hum, a low drone of ancient words that no longer touched the profound silence I now carried within me. I watched my brothers, their faces etched with lines of piety and unquestioning certainty, as they knelt in prayer. Brother Anselm, his gnarled hands clasped, his lips moving in silent supplication, seemed to inhabit a world I could no longer fully enter. Brother Gregory, his eyes bright with earnest devotion as he copied passages from the Gospels, appeared to be living in a waking dream, a beautiful, comforting illusion. I felt no judgment, no superiority, only a vast, aching distance. My secret, the impossible blue that hummed beneath my skin, separated me from them, a veil of knowing that no words could pierce, no shared ritual could bridge. It was a profound solitude, deeper than any silence our monastic vows had ever imposed. Sometimes, in the dead of night, when the monastery was a vast, cold stone tomb of sleeping souls, I would steal back to my window, my eyes drawn to the distant silhouette of the valley. The forest was an impenetrable wall of darkness, concealing the clearing, the pool, the impossible blue. A strange longing, tinged with a profound apprehension, stirred within me, a desire to return to the source of this unsettling truth, yet a fear of what further truths it might reveal. The world outside had always been a place of unknown dangers, of bandits and wild beasts, and the terrifying indifference of nature. But now, the true unknown was not out there, in the shadowed valley, but within the silent chambers of my own transformed soul. The quiet hum of the universe, once a whisper, was now a constant, resonant vibration, a ceaseless, wordless prayer. My duties in the scriptorium, once a meticulous devotion, had become a quiet act of sabotage. I continued to copy the ancient texts, my quill still dancing across the parchment with practiced elegance, forming the beautiful, intricate script of our order. I rendered every initial, every margin, every flourish with the same unwavering precision. But the words themselves, the sacred truths and divine pronouncements, now felt like hollow shell. My mind, instead of meditating on their meaning, was filled with the silent, resonant hum of the impossible blue, a ceaseless counterpoint to the familiar cadence of our liturgy. Sometimes, a subtle deviation would escape my hand, a tiny, almost imperceptible shift in a letter's curve, a line drawn with an unusual confidence, a shading and an illumination that held a faint, otherworldly glow. No one noticed, of course. The eyes of our librarian, Brother Benedict, were too focused on the perfection of the form, the absence of error, to perceive the quiet rebellion of a soul no longer bound by the written word. He saw only the meticulous craftsmanship, the dutiful monk. He did not see the vast, empty space where faith once resided, now filled with the silent, pulsing light of an unknowable cosmos. I would trace a line of scripture speaking of divine intervention, of miracles performed by the hand of the Almighty, and a quiet, almost imperceptible smile would touch my lips. How simple, how comforting these ancient tales now seem, how carefully constructed to provide solace in a world of profound, indifferent chaos. The blue light had offered no such reassurances. It had simply been vast and unknowable, a stark mirror reflecting the true nature of existence, untainted by human hope or fear. It was a terrifying freedom, this knowing, a solitude that separated me from the very foundations of my monastic life. The hours in the scriptorium stretched long, the tallow lamp casting its shaky glow on the parchment, the wind outside whispering secrets against the cold stone walls. I could hear the faint sounds of the monastery, the distant cough of a brother, the soft scrape of sandals on stone, the rustle of a turning page. They were the sounds of a world I inhabited, but no longer truly belonged to. I was a phantom among them, a silent watcher, performing the sacred rituals with hands that remembered, but a heart that no longer believed. The parchment, once a sacred vessel, now felt like a fragile, insubstantial membrane, separating the visible world of human belief from the vast, indifferent truths that hummed just beneath its surface. And sometimes, when the light was low and my mind was weary, I would swear I could hear the faint, distant hum of the blue sphere, calling me, pulling me from beyond the walls, from beyond the realm of human knowing. The most profound shifts are often the least visible. My outward life, the life of Brother Thomas the scribe, continued as before. I rose with the bells, ate my pottage, chanted the psalms, and copied the ancient texts. My brothers, immersed in their own duties and devotions, perceived no change. Why would they? I offered no blasphemies, no defiance, no outward sign of the chasm that had opened within me. I was a silent, unremarkable cog in the vast, unchanging mechanism of monastic life. Yet, every interaction, every moment was now viewed through a subtly altered lens. When Brother Gregory, his face alight with fervent devotion, would speak of a vision of the Virgin or a dream of celestial choirs, I would listen with a quiet, almost clinical interest. His faith was a vibrant, living thing, a warm fire in his soul. Mine had been replaced by the cold, clear light of the blue sphere. A light that offered no comforting narratives, no promises of divine intervention. I saw his belief not as truth, but as a beautiful, necessary illusion, a carefully constructed shelter against the terrifying vastness I had glimpsed. The suffering of the villagers, which once stoked my doubt and fueled my spiritual torment, now seemed to reside in a different dimension. When reports reached us of another harsh winter, of children with distended bellies, of families succumbing to illness, I still felt a pang of sorrow, a purely human ache. But it was no longer accompanied by the furious, unanswered questions directed at a distant, seemingly cruel God. The blue sphere had offered no explanation for suffering, only an implicit understanding of its presence, a natural part of the indifferent turning of the cosmic wheel. It was not a punishment, nor a test. It simply was. This new perspective brought a strange, unsettling peace. The relentless gnawing of theological paradoxes, the desperate search for divine purpose, had ceased. I was no longer wrestling with God, for the God I had once believed in had receded, replaced by an incomprehensible, shimmering reality. The world, stripped of its divine scaffolding, appeared starker, more brutal, but also more wondrous in its raw, unfiltered existence. A single snowflake, caught on the window pane, seemed to hold more cosmic mystery than all the illuminated texts in the scriptorium. A gust of wind, rattling the ancient timbers, carried the echo of the endless, unheeding forces that shaped the very stars. I was living a dual life, the monk who prayed in Latin and bowed his head, and the silent watcher who carried the hum of the impossible blue, a stranger in his own skin, utterly alone in his profound, unburdened knowing. The heavy stone walls of the monastery, once a comfort, now felt like a fragile, artificial boundary against an infinite, indifferent universe. Sleep, once a desperate escape from the gnawing anxieties of my soul, had become a different kind of burden. I still lay on my straw pallet, wrapped in the rough wool of my habit, but the familiar rhythm of the monastery's breathing, the low symphony of snores and murmurs, no longer lulled me into oblivion. Instead, I would lie awake for long stretches in the deep hours of the night, my mind adrift in the vast, silent sea of my new understanding. The silence of the communal sleeping hall, once filled with the imagined presence of God, now felt like a hollow chamber, echoing with the profound, indifferent hum of the cosmos. My dreams, when they came, were vivid, unsettling, and utterly devoid of the familiar religious imagery that once populated my subconscious. No angels with flaming swords, no saints in robes of light, no visions of paradise. Instead, I saw vast, unseeing eyes, drifting through cosmic darkness. I witnessed worlds being born and dying in silent, indifferent bursts of light. I heard whispers of languages that were not spoken with tongues, but with the very fabric of existence, patterns of light and shadow, echoes of the impossible blue. I would wake with a start, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs, the images clinging to my mind like cold dew. The usual nocturnal disturbances of monastic life, a brother's cough, the distant howl of a wolf, the scurry of mice in the rafters, now seemed almost comforting in their mundane familiarity. They were anchors, tethering me to the world of the living, reminding me that I still existed within its predictable boundaries. But the dreams, those silent, terrifying journeys into the unknowable, pulled me deeper into the alien landscape of my transformed perception. I felt like a ship adrift on an endless sea, its compass shattered, its charts burned, guided only by the cold, indifferent stars that no longer promised salvation, but simply were. Sometimes in the deepest watch of the night, when the monastery was truly still, I would feel an irresistible pull towards the window of my cell. I would rise, silently, and gaze out into the impenetrable darkness of the valley. The forest, a black silhouette against the faintly visible stars, held the secret of the blue sphere. I felt no urgent need to return, no desperate longing for another glimpse. The presence of the sphere was already within me, its hum a constant resonance in my bone, but a quiet, almost reverent anticipation would stir in my chest. A sense that the universe, vast and unfathomable, was still out there, continuing its silent, indifferent dance, and that I, Brother Thomas, now carried a piece of its unknowable truth, a secret burden that defined my restless, dream-haunted nights. And in the profound solitude of those hours, the silence of the monastery was no longer merely quiet, but a vast, empty space, waiting to be filled. The weight of my secret, the impossible blue that hummed beneath my skin, was a heavy cloak. Yet it offered a strange kind of freedom. For 20 years, my world had been meticulously ordered by bells and rituals, by prescribed thoughts and collective prayers. Every moment, every gesture, had been designed to bring me closer to a divine truth, a preordained destiny. But the sphere had shattered that careful scaffolding, leaving me adrift in a universe that offered no such comforting certainty. It was a terrifying liberation, a release from the relentless burden of seeking a God who no longer answered, because perhaps he had never truly been asking the questions I thought he would. This new freedom, however, came with a profound sense of isolation. I was a stranger among my brothers, performing the same rituals, speaking the same words, but inhabiting a completely different reality. How could I confess this? How could I explain a truth that bypassed words, a knowledge born not of scripture or revelation, but of a silent, pulsing blue? They would call it madness, or worse, a demonic possession. I would be subjected to exorcisms, to penance, to endless prayers designed to cast out the very truth that now defined me. So I remained silent, a quiet observer, a phantom moving through familiar halls, carrying my secret like a glowing ember clutched tight to my chest. The irony was not lost on me. I, who had once yearned for a deeper connection to the divine, a more profound understanding of God's will, had been granted a glimpse into a truth so vast, so indifferent, that it rendered all human concepts of divinity utterly insignificant. The universe did not care for our prayers, our sins, our desperate longing for meaning. It simply spun, a colossal, uncaring mechanism, beautiful in its raw, unadorned existence. And in that terrifying realization, there was a strange, unsettling peace. Sometimes a quiet, almost mischievous joy would stir within me, as Brother Benedict lectured on the intricate symbolism of a biblical beast, or Brother Anselm wept tears of devotion during a particularly fervent prayer. I would feel a quiet, internal smile. Their certainty, their beautiful, comforting illusions were a testament to the human need for meaning, for connection. And I, the silent, faithless scribe, now carried a piece of the vast, unknowable truth that lay just beyond the veil of their belief. The monastery walls, once a symbol of sanctuary, now felt like a fragile, artificial boundary against an infinite, indifferent universe. My life, once dictated by divine purpose, was now simply a quiet existence, a single flickering flame in the vast cosmic night, free of the burdens of expectation or the comfort of illusion. The hem of the sphere was a constant presence, a silent song of profound and terrifying liberty. The familiar scent of damp earth and wood smoke, always present in the monastery, began to hold new resonance. It was the scent of the mundane, of the real, anchoring me to this physical plane even as my mind drifted through cosmic landscapes. But now, intertwined with those familiar aromas, was the faint, sweet scent of crushed herbs and distant rain, the indelible signature of the clearing where the blue sphere pulsed. It was a phantom fragrance, perceptible only to me, a constant reminder of the unseen world that now permeated my very being. I would trace the intricate veins of a leaf during my daily walk in the monastery garden, seeing not merely the delicate structure of creation, but the subtle, flowing energies that bound all things together. The rustle of the wind through the bare branches of the ancient oak seemed to carry echoes of the language I had glimpsed within the sphere. A silent communication of light and shadow, of motion and stillness. Every sensory detail once taken for granted now vibrated with a hidden life, a profound connection to the vast indifferent cosmos. The texture of the rough wool of my habit, the smooth coolness of the parchment beneath my fingers, the gritty taste of the pottage. All these familiar sensations now felt sharper, more immediate, as if my senses had been honed by the encounter with the impossible blue. I was more present in the mundane, yet simultaneously more distant, observing it all with the quiet, detached curiosity of a stranger. My ears, once attuned to the familiar sounds of prayer and daily chores, now seemed to pick up subtler frequencies, the almost imperceptible hum of the earth beneath the stone, the faint whisper of distant stars, the silent, ceaseless dance of microscopic life. This heightened perception was both a blessing and a burden. The world, once a tapestry woven with divine purpose, now unfolded as a vast, intricate mechanism, breathtaking in its complexity, yet utterly indifferent to human concern. Beauty remained, stark and unadorned, the cold gleam of moonlight on frost, the intricate patterns of a spider's web, the silent flight of a nocturnal bird. But it was a beauty devoid of divine intention, a spontaneous bloom in the indifferent dance of existence. And in that profound understanding, a quiet, almost reverent awe settled upon me. The colors of the sunset, once symbols of God's artistry, now bled across the sky like a cosmic wound, vast and unheeding. The silence of the monastery, that pervasive, watchful presence, seemed to breathe with the same profound indifference as the cosmos itself. I was a witness, a silent observer, carrying the echo of the impossible blue, a phantom presence in a world that had become both sharper and more alien, yet strangely, beautifully real. The library, a cool, silent haven filled with the scent of aged leather and dust, had always been my solace. Hours spent poring over ancient texts, their illuminated pages whispering stories of saints and kings, of divine miracles and earthly trials. But now, the words themselves, once so authoritative, seemed to ripple with a new, unsettling ambiguity. I would trace the elegant Latin script, reading of the meticulously ordered heavens, of God's benevolent hand guiding the stars, of humanity's central place in the divine creation, and an internal silent smile would touch my lips. How beautiful, how utterly human these narratives were, how carefully constructed to provide solace, to impose order on a universe that, as the blue sphere had revealed, was anything but ordered in the way we understood. The celestial charts, once symbols of divine precision, now seemed crude, clumsy attempts to map a reality far vaster, far more fluid than any human mind could conceive. The prophecies of the Old Testament, once ironclad pronouncements of a fearsome God, now read like poetic musings, born of desperation and yearning. I turned pages, the rustle of parchment a soft whisper in the stillness, my eyes scanning the familiar lines. The very act of reading had become a form of silent meditation, not on the text's meaning, but on the nature of belief itself. How we, as humans, clung to narratives, to structures, to the comforting illusion of control in the face of an indifferent cosmos. The blue sphere had offered no such illusion. It had simply been a raw, unfiltered presence that shattered all preconceived notions of order and purpose. The portraits of the great saints, painted on the walls in vibrant colors, their eyes fixed on some distant celestial vision, seemed to hold a new meaning. Were they truly seeing God, or were they, like me, glimpsing the terrifying, beautiful indifference of the universe and translating it into a language their times could understand? I felt no judgment towards them, only a profound, quiet understanding. Their faith, fervent and unwavering, was a shield, a necessary bulwark against the overwhelming vastness. I closed a heavy, leather-bound tome, the soft thud echoing in the stillness. The library, once a repository of sacred truth, now felt like a magnificent monument to human yearning, a testament to our relentless search for meaning in a world that offered none beyond what we ourselves created. The hum of the blue sphere, a constant resonance deep within my bones, was the only truth I now truly held, and it was a truth that whispered not of answers, but of questions, of an endless, beautiful unfolding of the unknowable. The dust motes danced in the shaft of light, a silent, cosmic ballet, utterly indifferent to the ancient words that filled the shelves. The cold, a pervasive, ancient presence in the monastery, seemed to find its way not just into the stone, but into the very fabric of my being. Yet, since my encounter with the blue sphere, it was a cold that no longer tormented me. It simply was, like the vast indifference of the cosmos itself. The chill of the pre-dawn hours, when the bells tolled for matins and I rose from my straw pallet, no longer pierced me to the bone. Instead, I felt a strange, almost detached observation of it, a quiet acceptance of its presence, much like the acceptance of the profound, unheeding silence I now carried within me. The wind, whispering secrets through unseen cracks in the ancient walls, no longer sounded like a mournful wail, but like the ceaseless, indifferent breath of the universe. It carried the scent of distant snow, of thawing earth, of the wild, untamed forest that pressed against the monastery's boundaries. I would stand by my window, my breath pluming lightly in the frigid air, and simply listen, absorbing the raw, unfiltered presence of the natural world. It was a world that did not care for my prayers, or my sins, or my fading faith. It simply existed, in all its brutal beauty and cold indifference. And in that raw existence, I found a strange, unsettling peace. The other monks still complained of the cold, rubbing their hands together, huddling closer to the meager warmth of the brazier in the communal hall. I observed them with a quiet, almost clinical curiosity. Their discomfort was real, their yearning for warmth a palpable thing, but I felt a subtle detachment from it, as if my own body, having glimpsed the profound indifference of the universe, had learned to resonate with its cold, unheeding presence. The hum of the blue sphere, that impossible light that had penetrated my very soul, had left behind a kind of internal warmth, a quiet, constant presence that transcended mere temperature. The chill of the stone floors, the dampness that clung to the rough wool of my habit, the icy bite of the mountain air, all these familiar sensations now felt like part of a larger, grander design. The universe in all its vastness was a place of extreme temperatures, of blazing stars and icy voids. And I, Brother Thomas, now carried a piece of that truth within me. The cold was no longer an enemy to be fought, but a simple fact of existence, a constant reminder of the raw, unadorned reality that lay just beneath the veil of human perception. It was a profound and unsettling acceptance, a surrender to the indifference that now permeated every aspect of my being. The moon, a cold, indifferent eye, watched from the vast, star-strewn sky, its light bathing the snow-covered peaks in a silent, surgical gleam. The other brothers, for all their piety and devotion, were creatures of habit, their lives meticulously ordered by the unchanging rhythms of the monastic day. Their gaze was typically directed inwards, towards scripture and prayer, or outwards, towards the familiar landscape of the valley and the endless cycle of the seasons. They noticed little beyond the immediate, the expected, and so my subtle transformation remained unseen, my quiet revolution unheard. I was just Brother Thomas, the quiet scribe diligently performing his duties, outwardly unchanged. Yet a few small shifts in my own routine, almost imperceptible even to myself, began to occur. I found myself lingering longer in the scriptorium after the others had departed, not out of duty, but a strange compulsion to be alone in the vast, echoing silence. The tallow lamp would burn low, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with the unseen energies of the cosmos. I would sit, my quill silent in my hand, listening not to the monastic quiet, but to the deeper resonant hum that now filled the space between the words, a silent song of the impossible blue. My walks in the monastery garden, once a brief respite from the confines of the scriptorium, now became solitary pilgrimages. I would wander amongst the bare branches of the fruit trees, my eyes scanning the distant silhouette of the valley, feeling the subtle pull towards the hidden clearing. I never returned, not yet. The memory of the blue sphere was too profound, too unsettling, to risk a second encounter so soon, but the yearning remained, a quiet ache, a constant whisper beneath the surface of my consciousness. At meals I ate my pottage with the same quiet indifference, but my gaze would often drift to the high windows of the refectory, where the sky unfolded its vast, indifferent canvas. The clouds, once mere atmospheric phenomena, now seemed to swirl with hidden patterns, reflections of cosmic currents I could not comprehend. The sounds of my brothers eating, their low murmurs, the clatter of wooden bowls, seemed distant, almost muffled, as if I were observing them from behind a thick, invisible pane of glass. This profound isolation, this silent journey into the unknowable, was both a heavy burden and a strange kind of liberation. I no longer yearned for the comforting illusions of my old faith, for the warm embrace of a benevolent God. The universe, revealed in its raw, unadorned truth by the impossible blue, was far grander, far more terrifying, and utterly indifferent. And I, Brother Thomas, was now a small, quiet witness to that vast, unheeding majesty, carrying its silent hum deep within my bones, a stranger in my own skin, utterly alone in my transformed understanding. The ancient stone walls of the monastery, once a sanctuary, now felt like a fragile, permeable membrane against an infinite, eternal indifference. The seasons turned as they always had, a relentless, indifferent turning of the cosmic wheel. Winter's biting grip slowly loosened, yielding to the damp, awakening breath of early spring. The snow, which had clung to the mountain peaks like a shroud, began its slow retreat, revealing the scarred gray rock beneath. The monastery's daily rhythm, a constant anchor in the vast indifference of the universe, remained unchanged. Bells tolled, prayers were chanted, parchment rustled, and I, Brother Thomas, continued my quiet, solitary existence, performing the outward rituals while carrying the humming secret of the impossible blue deep within my soul. The shift in seasons, once a marker of time, of liturgical cycles, now seemed to ripple with a deeper, more profound meaning. I observed the first fragile green shoots pushing through the thawing earth in the monastery garden, not as a symbol of divine renewal, but as a stark testament to the relentless, uncaring process of life and decay. The trees, their bare branches now adorned with the first tentative buds, seemed to pulse with a silent energy, a flow of forces that transcended human understanding or spiritual intention. It was a beautiful, brutal unfolding, utterly devoid of the benevolent hand I had once believed it. My days in the scriptorium continued, the methodical scrape of quill on parchment a constant counterpoint to the silent, resonant hum that now filled my internal world. I copied passages speaking of God's infinite love, of His meticulous creation, of the universe as a carefully crafted testament to His glory. And I would render each letter, each flourish, with the same unwavering precision, a phantom hand performing a sacred duty while my mind drifted through cosmic landscapes of terrifying indifference. The irony, a quiet internal smile, was a constant companion. The other brothers, oblivious to the profound shift within me, continued their own quiet struggles and fervent devotions. Brother Anselm's cough grew deeper with the damp spring air, his faith, if anything, seeming to intensify with each passing day. Brother Gregory would still speak of his dreams, visions of celestial peace and divine comfort, and I would listen with a quiet, detached interest, knowing that his illusions, beautiful and fragile, were a necessary shield against the vast, unheeding reality I now carried. The urge to return to the clearing, to the source of the impossible blue, remained, a constant, low thrum beneath the surface of my consciousness. But it was not a desperate yearning, nor a fearful compulsion. It was a quiet knowing, a sense that the encounter had changed me irrevocably, and that its truths, once glimpsed, were now a permanent part of my being. The universe, vast and unfathomable, continued its silent, indifferent dance, and I, Brother Thomas, was now a small, quiet witness, carrying its silent hum deep within my bones, a stranger in my own skin, utterly alone in my transformed understanding. The ancient stone walls of the monastery, once a sanctuary, now felt like a fragile, permeable membrane against an infinite eternal indifference. The stars, cold and unblinking, still watched, and the profound silence that now permeated every aspect of my life was the only prayer I now truly knew. The long, slow days of early spring bled into the deeper green of summer. The monastery, once a place of perpetual cold, now felt different, the ancient stones holding the sun's warmth well into the evening hours. The garden flourished, a riot of green and nascent life, the air thick with the scent of burgeoning herbs and the low hum of industrious bees. My duties remained unchanged. The scriptorium, the refectory, the chapel, the communal silence broken only by the tolling of bells and the murmur of prayers. But within me, the subtle resonance of the impossible blue persisted, a constant, quiet counterpoint to the mundane rhythms of my existence. I found myself drawn more and more to the natural world around the monastery, observing it with a heightened awareness, a new, almost clinical clarity. The intricate dance of an ant colony across the chapel steps, the silent, watchful gaze of a beetle crawling along a sun-warmed stone, the relentless, patient growth of a vine climbing the ancient walls, all these small details, once overlooked, now hummed with a profound, unadorned truth. They simply were, living and dying in the ceaseless, indifferent turning of the cosmic wheel, untouched by human concepts of sin or salvation. This raw, unadorned existence, glimpsed through the lens of the blue sphere, held a strange, unsettling beauty. My hands, though still forming the elegant Latin script in the scriptorium, moved with a different kind of precision. Each stroke of the quill, each meticulously rendered illumination, felt less like an act of devotion and more like a quiet act of mirroring the intricate, indifferent patterns of the universe. I would copy passages speaking of God's intricate design, of His purposeful creation, and a quiet internal smile would touch my lips. How carefully we crafted our illusions, our comforting narratives, to make sense of a reality far vaster, far more chaotic than any human mind could grasp. The parchment, once a sacred vessel for divine truth, now felt like a fragile, permeable membrane, separating the visible world of human belief from the profound, unheeding forces that hummed just beneath its surface. The sunlight, streaming through the high windows, no longer felt like a benevolent blessing, but simply the raw, unblinking gaze of a distant, indifferent star. I felt no torment, no gnawing doubt, only a profound, quiet acceptance of this new reality. My old faith, that intricate scaffolding of belief, had crumbled not into a void, but into a vast open space, filled with the resonant hum of the impossible blue. I was a witness, a silent observer, carrying this secret knowledge like a glowing ember clutched tight to my chest, a stranger in my own skin, utterly alone in my transformed understanding. And in the profound solitude of those sun-drenched hours, the silence of the monastery was no longer merely quiet, but a vast, empty space, waiting to be filled with the ceaseless, indifferent song of the cosmos. The heat of summer intensified, pressing down on the monastery walls, baking the stone, and turning the air into a shimmering haze above the sun-drenched courtyard. The scent of dust and parched earth mingled with the faint sweetness of summer flowers from the garden, a heavy, drowsy perfume that seemed to lull the world into a state of somnolence. The brothers moved slower, their habits clinging to their skin, their chants a little less robust in the stifling warmth. But the heat, like the cold before it, no longer seemed to penetrate me in the same way. It simply was, a raw, unfiltered presence in the ceaseless dance of existence. My senses, heightened by the encounter with the impossible blue, perceived the summer's embrace with a new, almost clinical clarity. I felt the dry, rough texture of the sun-baked stones beneath my sandals, the subtle currents of warm air drifting through the scriptorium, carrying the faint metallic tang of ink and aged parchment. The drone of summer bees, a low, persistent hum, seemed to resonate with the deeper, cosmic hum that now filled my internal world, a constant, quiet counterpoint to the familiar cadence of our daily life. The sounds of the monastery, the distant clatter from the kitchen, the soft scrape of sandals on stone, the murmur of prayers from the chapel, felt distant, almost muffled, as if I were observing them from behind a thick, invisible pane of glass. My dreams, when they came, were still vivid, still unsettling, pulling me deeper into the alien landscape of my transformed perception. I no longer dreamed of angels or saints, but of vast, indifferent stars burning in the cosmic dark, of unseen forces sculpting galaxies from dust and light. I would wake with a quiet awareness of the profound silence that permeated my cell, a silence that was no longer empty, but filled with the resonant echo of the universe's ceaseless, unheeding turning. The work in the scriptorium, a meticulous act of repetition, continued to be my anchor to the familiar world. My hands moved across the parchment, forming perfect letters illuminating intricate margins, but my mind drifted, no longer seeking answers in the sacred words, but observing the subtle flow of energies, the silent, indifferent patterns that bound all things together. The narratives of divine purpose, of humanity's central place in creation, now seemed like beautiful, fragile illusions, carefully constructed shelters against the terrifying vastness I had glimpsed. The warmth of the sun, once a symbol of God's blessing, now bled across the sky like a cosmic wound, vast and unheeding. I felt no torment, no gnawing doubt, only a profound, quiet acceptance of this new reality. My old faith had not returned. It had been replaced by a vast open space, filled with the resonant hum of the impossible blue. And in the profound solitude of those sun-drenched hours, the silence of the monastery was no longer merely quiet, but a vast, empty space, waiting to be filled with the ceaseless, indifferent song of the cosmos. I was a phantom among them, a silent watcher, performing the sacred rituals with hands that remembered, but a heart that no longer believed. The long, languid days of summer gave way to the crisp, sharp air of autumn. The leaves in the valley turned, a brief, violent riot of crimson and gold before settling into the muted browns of decay. The monastery, too, seemed to brace itself for the colder months, the scent of burning wood mingling with the damp, earthy smell of fallen leaves. The annual harvest, a flurry of activity in the fields beyond our walls, brought a brief, boisterous interruption to our quiet routine, though I remained within the monastery's stone embrace. I watched the harvest from a high window in the scriptorium, observing the rhythmic swing of the scythes, the bent backs of the villagers, the slow, laden ox carts trundling back with their bounty. Once, I would have seen this as a testament to God's providence, a blessed yield from the earth. Now it was simply a raw, indifferent process, the earth giving, the humans taking, a relentless cycle of life and consumption, utterly devoid of divine intention. The blue sphere had shown me no grand design, only the ceaseless, unheeding turning of the wheel. My internal world remained a place of profound solitude, yet it was not a lonely solitude. The hum of the impossible blue was a constant companion, a resonant truth that filled every silent moment, every waking thought. It was a terrifying freedom, this knowing, a separation from the comforting narratives of faith, yet it brought a strange, unsettling peace. I was no longer wrestling with God, no longer searching for answers in ancient texts. The universe, vast and unfathomable, simply was, beyond the petty concerns of human sin or salvation. The smells of autumn, the sharp tang of wood smoke, the rich, damp scent of fallen leaves, the earthy aroma of root vegetables from the storeroom. All seemed to resonate with a new clarity. My senses, honed by the encounter with the sphere, perceived these mundane details with a heightened awareness, a deeper connection to the raw, unfiltered presence of the natural world. Each gust of wind, rattling the ancient timbers, carried the echo of the endless, uncaring forces that shaped the very stars. My work in the scriptorium continued, my quill dancing across the parchment, forming perfect letters, illuminating intricate margins. I copied passages speaking of humanity's place in the divine creation, of God's benevolent hand guiding the seasons. And I would render each stroke, each flourish, with the same unwavering precision, a phantom hand performing a sacred duty, while my mind drifted through cosmic landscapes of terrifying indifference. The parchment, once a sacred vessel for divine truth, now felt like a fragile, permeable membrane, separating the visible world of human belief from the profound, unheeding forces that hummed just beneath its surface. The cold gleam of the moon on the turning leaves, the distant baying of a hound in the valley, all these mundane details now felt like part of a larger, grander design, a silent, cosmic ballet unfolding in the vast, indifferent darkness. As autumn deepened, bringing with it the biting chill that promised another long winter, a subtle change began to manifest in the monastery. The quiet, watchful gaze of Brother Benedict, our meticulous librarian, seemed to linger on me a moment longer than usual. His eyes, usually sharp and discerning when examining a freshly copied page, now held a faint flicker of something akin to curiosity, or perhaps a nascent unease. I offered no outward sign of my internal transformation, maintained my silence, and continued my duties with the same quiet diligence. Yet a faint ripple of awareness seemed to stir in the still air around me. It was nothing overt, no direct questions, no accusations, merely a prolonged glance across the refectory, a subtle pause in his step when I passed him in the corridor, a whisper of a breath held slightly too long when I returned a completed manuscript to his care. Perhaps it was my own heightened senses, sharpened by the encounter with the blue sphere, that perceived these faint shifts. Or perhaps the profound solitude I now carried, the subtle resonance of the impossible blue that hummed beneath my skin, was beginning to emanate, a silent, imperceptible vibration in the ancient stone halls. I continued my work in the scriptorium, my quill dancing across the parchment, rendering the sacred texts with perfect precision. But sometimes, as Brother Benedict's shadow fell across my work, I would feel a strange internal smile. He was searching for error, for a misplaced letter, a smudged ink stain, a departure from the perfect form. He would find none of those. My hands remained flawless, my execution impeccable, but he would never perceive the true nature of my quiet rebellion. The vast, empty space where faith once resided, now filled with the silent, pulsing light of an unknowable cosmos. The air in the scriptorium grew colder with each passing day, the tallow lamp casting its shaky glow on the parchment, the wind outside whispering secrets against the cold stone walls. I could hear the faint sounds of the monastery, the distant cough of a brother, the soft scrape of sandals on stone, the rustle of turning pages. They were the sounds of a world I inhabited, but no longer truly belonged to. I was a phantom among them, a silent watcher, performing the sacred rituals with hands that remembered, but a heart that no longer believed. The subtle unease from Brother Benedict was like a faint, distant echo of a threat. Once it would have filled me with dread, with the fear of exposure, of condemnation. But now, it seemed distant, almost insignificant, a small human tremor in the vast, indifferent landscape of cosmic truth. The blue sphere had offered no such anxieties. It had simply been vast and unknowable, a stark mirror reflecting the true nature of existence, untainted by human hope or fear. My secret, the impossible blue that hummed beneath my skin, was a shield, a silent, resonant understanding that insulated me from the petty concerns of the world I had left behind. The first snow of winter fell, a soft, silent blanket that muffled the world outside the monastery walls. turning the rugged landscape into a hushed, pristine canvas. The cold deepened, seeping into the ancient stones, making the air in the scriptorium crackle with frost. This pervasive chill, once a source of constant discomfort, now felt like a familiar companion, a stark reminder of the universe's vast indifference. The hum of the impossible blue, resonating deep within me, was a subtle counterpoint, a quiet warmth that transcended mere temperature. Brother Benedict's watchful gaze intensified. I could feel his eyes upon me in the refectory, across the silent space of the scriptorium, even as I moved through the monastic corridors. It was a silent, persistent scrutiny, like a shadow lengthening in the pre-dawn light. He never spoke directly, never asked a question, but his presence was a constant, subtle pressure, a quiet probe. He was searching, though he knew not what for, a crack in the facade, a tremor in the stillness. One evening, as the last rays of sunlight bled from the western sky and the scriptorium filled with long dancing shadows, Brother Benedict approached my table. The air seemed to grow still, thick with unspoken questions. He picked up the page I had just completed, a meticulously copied passage from the Book of Job, detailing divine power and human suffering. His fingers, gnarled with age, traced the elegant script. I held my breath, not from fear, but from a quiet, almost mischievous anticipation. "Brother Thomas," he murmured, his voice low, a soft rustle in the profound silence. "Your hand is as precise as ever. Flawless." He paused, his eyes, sharp and discerning, lifted from the parchment to meet mine. "Yet, there is a stillness to your work, a quietude, as if the very spirit of the words themselves have become hushed beneath your touch." He laid the page down, his gaze unwavering. "Are you well, Brother Thomas? Is your soul at peace?" The question hung in the cold air, thick with unspoken meaning. It was a question born of his own deep faith, a concern for my spiritual well-being. But I heard it through a different lens, through the resonant hum of the impossible blue. My soul was at peace, yes, but a peace born not of salvation, but of a terrifying, beautiful indifference. It was a peace that would utterly shatter his ordered world. I offered a slight, almost imperceptible inclination of my head, my eyes meeting his with a quiet, unblinking clarity. "As well as one can be, Brother Benedict," I murmured, my voice a soft, unremarkable sound in the stillness. "The peace of God is profound." He searched my gaze for a long moment, a flicker of something akin to confusion, or perhaps a deeper, nascent unease passing through his eyes. He found no answers, no cracks, only the quiet, unyielding stillness of my presence. He nodded slowly, his lips a thin, tight line. "Indeed," he said, the word a soft exhalation, and then turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing softly on the cold stone. The air in the scriptorium seemed to settle, the shadows deepening. I returned to my work, my quill scraping softly across the parchment, the resonant hum of the impossible blue filling the vast, unheeding silence. The stillness he perceived was not divine peace, but cosmic indifference. Winter's embrace tightened, wrapping the monastery in a shroud of snow and biting wind. The world outside became a stark, unforgiving landscape, a canvas of white and gray, mirroring the deep, profound silence that now permeated my existence. The bells, though their sound was muffled by the thick snow, still marked the hours, a relentless rhythm that anchored the monks to their duties, their prayers, their comforting routines. For me, they were merely echoes, distant chimes in a universe that spun on, utterly unheeding. Brother Benedict's subtle scrutiny became a constant companion. He would often seat himself at a table near mine in the scriptorium, ostensibly for his own work. But I could feel his gaze upon me, A persistent, silent probe. He was searching for something. A sign, a deviation, a crack in the unyielding calm that now defined me. He had perceived a stillness, a quietude that unsettled him, a departure from the familiar spiritual anxieties or fervent devotions of the other brothers. He saw the absence of something, but could not name what. One frigid afternoon, as the light faded early and the tallow lamps were lit, casting long, dancing shadows across the parchment, Brother Benedict approached me again. He held a page from the very book of Job one had been copying, his finger resting on a passage that spoke of God's thunderous power and man's impotence before the divine. "Brother Thomas," he began, his voice a low, hesitant murmur in the quiet scriptorium. "This passage, do you find comfort in its truth? In the overwhelming might of the Almighty?" I paused, my quill hovering above the parchment. The words on the page spoke of a fearsome, intervening God. A deity who demanded awe and obedience. My mind, however, was filled with the resonant hum of the impossible blue. A truth far vaster, far more indifferent than any described in Scripture. I thought of the vast, unseeing eyes I had glimpsed within the sphere. The cosmic dance of distant stars, the silence of a universe that simply was. "Brother Benedict," I replied, my voice calm, a soft ripple in the stillness. "The universe is indeed vast, and man is indeed small." I met his gaze, my eyes holding a quiet, unblinking clarity. There is a profound peace in that knowledge. He studied me, his brow furrowed, a flicker of something akin to confusion, or perhaps a deeper, nascent unease, passing through his eyes. He was searching for piety, for humility, for devotion. He found only a stark, unwavering acceptance, a quiet reflection of the very vastness I spoke of. His lips tightened, and he slowly nodded. "Indeed, Brother Thomas, profound." He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing softly on the cold stone. The air seemed to settle, the shadows deepening. I returned to my work, my quill scraping softly across the parchment, the resonant hum of the impossible blue filling the vast, unheeding silence. The stillness he perceived was not divine peace, but cosmic indifference, a truth far too immense for human words. The winter deepened, bringing with it a solitude that was both external and internal. The monastery, often bustling even in the cold, now felt quieter, muffled by the heavy snow that blanketed the world outside. The routines continued, relentless and unchanging, like the indifferent turning of the cosmic wheel. Matins in the pre-dawn chill, prime as the first weak light touched the peaks. Tercel, sext, nuns, vespers, compline, each bell a quiet, insistent reminder of time passing, of rituals performed, of a faith that, for me, had receded into the vast, unheeding silence. Brother Benedict's scrutiny had become a constant, almost palpable presence. He no longer approached me directly in the scriptorium, but I could feel his gaze, a quiet, persistent probe from across the room. He was searching, I knew, for a deviation, a falter, a moment when the profound stillness that now defined me might break. He spent more time in the library, poring over ancient texts on spiritual maladies, on heresies, on the subtle temptations of the old one. I observed him with a quiet, detached curiosity, understanding his fear, his need for order in a world that, as the blue sphere had revealed, was utterly chaotic and indifferent. My own internal world remained a place of profound solitude, yet it was not a lonely solitude. The hum of the impossible blue was a constant companion, a resonant truth that filled every silent moment, every waking thought. It was a terrifying freedom, this knowing, a separation from the comforting narratives of faith. Yet it brought a strange, unsettling peace. I was no longer wrestling with God, no longer searching for answers in ancient texts. The universe, vast and unfathomable, simply was, beyond the petty concerns of human sin or salvation. The dreams, when they came, were still vivid, still unsettling, pulling me deeper into the alien landscape of my transformed perception. I no longer dreamed of angels or saints, but of vast indifferent stars burning in the cosmic dark, of unseen forces sculpting galaxies from dust and light. I would wake with a quiet awareness of the profound silence that permeated my cell, a silence that was no longer empty, but filled with the resonant echo of the universe's ceaseless, unheeding turning. The air in my cell, thick with the scent of damp wool and cold stone, seemed to press down, a silent, weighty presence. I would stand by the window, my breath pluming lightly in the frigid air, and gaze out into the impenetrable darkness of the valley. The forest, a black silhouette against the faintly visible stars, held the secret of the blue sphere. I felt no urgent need to return, no desperate longing for another glimpse. The presence of the sphere was already within me, its hum a constant resonance in my bones. And in the profound solitude of those hours, the silence of the monastery was no longer merely quiet, but a vast, empty space, waiting to be filled with the ceaseless, indifferent song of the cosmos. The cold truly bit now, settling deep into the stone, making the very air within the monastery feel brittle. The scent of wood smoke, a constant presence through the colder months, was sharper, more desperate, as the monks huddled closer to the meager warmth of the communal brazier. My own senses, sharpened by the encounter with the impossible blue, perceived every detail with a heightened clarity. The precise way the candlelight flickered against the damp walls of my cell, the faint, dry rustle of parchment as I turned a page in the scriptorium, the quiet, almost imperceptible scrape of my quill. Brother Benedict's scrutiny had, if anything, intensified. It was not a direct gaze, but a peripheral awareness, like a bird of prey circling high above. He seemed to be observing my every movement, my every silent gesture, searching for a flaw in the unyielding calm that now defined me. He had begun to spend more time near my table in the scriptorium, ostensibly correcting manuscripts, but his attention, I knew, was fixed on me. He was searching for a sign, any sign, that would allow him to categorize this unsettling stillness, to fit it back into the familiar framework of his faith. One evening, as the monastery settled into the deep, profound silence of Compline, I found myself drawn to the outer courtyard. The air was a sharp shock against my face, cold and clean, carrying the scent of distant snow and the vast, unheeding indifference of the mountain. The sky above was a canvas of inky black scattered with countless, glittering stars, each one a distant, indifferent sun, burning in the cosmic dark. The light from the monastery windows was a faint yellow glow against the profound darkness, a fragile human warmth against the overwhelming cold of the universe. I stood for a long time, my breath pluming lightly in the frigid air, observing the cold majesty of the night. The stillness was absolute, broken only by the faint whisper of the wind, and the distant, almost imperceptible hum that resonated from deep within my bones. The constant, profound presence of the impossible blue. It was a silence that held no answers, no promises, only the raw, unadorned truth of existence. And in that terrifying realization, there was a strange, unsettling peace. As I turned to re-enter the monastery, a shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness near the chapel. Brother Benedict, he had been watching me. His face, etched with lines of cold and concern, was a stark image in the faint light. He did not speak, only watched, his eyes searching mine. I met his gaze, my own eyes holding a quiet, unblinking clarity, reflecting the vast, indifferent stars above. He found no answers, no cracks, only the quiet, unyielding stillness of my presence. He nodded slowly, a soft exhalation of defeat, and then turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing softly on the cold stone. The profound silence closed around me, vast and unheeding, filled only with the resonant hum of the impossible blue. The winter days grew shorter, the light a fleeting, precious commodity that barely touched the high monastery walls. The scent of wood smoke was now constant, thick in the air, clinging to habits and stone alike. A desperate human effort against the relentless cold. My duties continued, a quiet, unchanging rhythm that anchored me to the familiar world. In the scriptorium, the rhythmic scrape of my quill on parchment was a constant counterpoint to the silent, resonant hum that filled my internal world. Brother Benedict's scrutiny had reached a new intensity, a quiet, almost desperate probe. He would appear in my cell during the brief permitted free hours, not to speak, but simply to sit in silence, observing me as I read or prepared my quill. His gaze was a tangible weight, searching for some sign of spiritual turmoil, a crack in the calm. I offered nothing, merely continued my quiet tasks, my presence a still, unyielding mirror reflecting his own discomfort. He would eventually leave, his footsteps echoing softly, a defeated sound in the profound silence. My dreams, when they came, were still vivid, still unsettling, pulling me deeper into the alien landscape of my transformed perception. I no longer dreamed of angels or saints, but of vast, indifferent stars burning in the cosmic dark, of unseen forces sculpting galaxies from dust and light. I would wake with a quiet awareness of the profound silence that permeated my cell, a silence that was no longer empty, but filled with the resonant echo of the universe's ceaseless, unheeding turning. It was a terrifying freedom, this knowing, a separation from the comforting narratives of faith. Yet it brought a strange, unsettling peace. The cold was a constant companion, seeping into the ancient stones, making the air in the scriptorium crackle with frost. Yet, it no longer tormented me. It simply was, like the vast indifference of the cosmos itself. The hum of the impossible blue, resonating deep within me, was a subtle counterpoint, a quiet warmth that transcended mere temperature. The monastery walls, once a symbol of sanctuary, now felt like a fragile, permeable membrane against an infinite, eternal indifference. I spent more time by the window of my cell, my breath plumbing lightly in the frigid air, gazing out into the impenetrable darkness of the valley. The forest, a black silhouette against the faintly visible stars, held the secret of the blue sphere. I felt no urgent need to return, no desperate longing for another glimpse. The presence of the sphere was already within me, its hum a constant resonance in my bone. And in the profound solitude of those hours, the silence of the monastery was no longer merely quiet, but a vast, empty space, waiting to be filled with the ceaseless, indifferent song of the cosmos. The stars, cold and unblinking, still watched, and the profound silence that now permeated every aspect of my life was the only prayer I now truly knew. The darkest hours of winter, deep and unyielding, held the monastery in their cold embrace. The world outside was a canvas of stark white snow and skeletal trees, hushed beneath the heavy silence of the season. Within the stone walls, the rhythm of monastic life, once a comforting anchor, now felt like a distant mechanical hum, a counterpoint to the profound cosmic stillness that resonated within me. Brother Benedict's visits to my cell had ceased. His silent scrutiny from across the scriptorium, however, persisted, a constant peripheral awareness. He was no longer searching for a crack, for a deviation. Instead, his gaze held a new quality, a quiet resignation, tinged with a faint, lingering unease. He had observed my unyielding calm through the harshness of winter, my unwavering stillness in the face of cold and solitude, and he had found no familiar explanation. The absence of spiritual turmoil, the lack of fervent devotion, the quiet detachment that defined me, was beyond his understanding. He saw me, Brother Thomas, the quiet scribe, but he no longer recognized the soul he believed should dwell within a monk. My internal world remained a place of profound solitude, yet it was not a lonely solitude. The hum of the impossible blue was a constant companion, a resonant truth that filled every silent moment, every waking thought. It was a terrifying freedom, this knowing, a separation from the comforting narratives of faith. Yet it brought a strange, unsettling peace. I was no longer wrestling with God, no longer searching for answers in ancient texts. The universe, vast and unfathomable, simply was beyond the petty concerns of human sin or salvation. The dreams, when they came, were still vivid, still unsettling, pulling me deeper into the alien landscape of my transformed perception. I no longer dreamed of angels or saints, but of vast, indifferent stars burning in the cosmic dark, of unseen forces sculpting galaxies from dust and light. I would wake with a quiet awareness of the profound silence that permeated my cell, a silence that was no longer empty, but filled with the resonant echo of the universe's ceaseless, unheeding turning. The cold was a constant companion, seeping into the ancient stones, making the air in the scriptorium crackle with frost. Yet, it no longer tormented me. It simply was, like the vast indifference of the cosmos itself. The hymn of the impossible blue, resonating deep within me, was a subtle counterpoint, a quiet warmth that transcended mere temperature. The monastery walls, once a symbol of sanctuary, now felt like a fragile, permeable membrane against an infinite, eternal indifference. The stars, cold and unblinking, still watched, and the profound silence that now permeated every aspect of my life was the only prayer I now truly knew. The deepest cold of winter began its slow, grudging retreat. The snow, once a vast, unbroken shroud, now showed faint signs of yielding, its surface softening in the brief, pale sunlight. Drip, drip, the sound of melting ice from the eaves was a new, persistent rhythm, a counterpoint to the unchanging monastic bells. The scent of damp earth began to mingle with the pervasive wood smoke, a subtle promise of things stirring beneath the frozen ground. For me, these shifts were not merely the turning of seasons, but a profound, almost visceral affirmation of the ceaseless, indifferent dance of the cosmos. My awareness of these minute changes had become acutely sharpened since my encounter with the impossible blue. Where once I had perceived the winter as a period of static, enduring hardship, now I saw it as a dynamic, flowing process, its grip loosening with an exquisite, unheeding precision. The faint green of new moss on the north-facing walls, the tentative chirps of unseen birds returning to the barren trees, the subtle softening of the cold stone beneath my habit. Each detail resonated with the silent cosmic hum that filled my internal world. It was a language spoken not in words, but in the raw, unfolding truth of existence, utterly devoid of the benevolent hand I had once believed in. Brother Benedict's gaze, though still present, had softened into a quiet, almost bewildered observation. The intensity of his scrutiny had waned, replaced by a sort of weary acceptance. He no longer sought to categorize my stillness, no longer probed with unspoken questions. He simply observed, a monk confronted with a mystery he could not reconcile with his ordered world. I offered him no answers, no explanations, merely continued my duties with the same quiet diligence, my presence a still, unyielding mirror, reflecting his own discomfort and profound lack of understanding. My hands, moving across the parchment in the scriptorium, formed perfect letters, rendering the sacred texts with an impeccable precision, but my mind drifted, free and unburdened by the word. The days stretched longer, each one bringing a little more light, a little more warmth to the monastery. The scent of damp wool and old parchment, always present, now carried a faint, almost imperceptible undertone of fresh, thawing earth, a subtle reminder of the vast, unheeding world stirring just beyond our walls. My cell, though still a small, cold chamber, felt less like a prison and more like a quiet vantage point from which to observe the endless, indifferent unfolding of the universe. The hum of the impossible blue, resonating deep within me, was a subtle counterpoint to the melting snow, a quiet warmth that transcended mere temperature. It was a freedom terrifying in its immensity, a profound peace born not of salvation, but of an utter, unburdened indifference. As the ice relinquished its hold, a subtle lightness began to permeate my being, a sensation akin to the melting snow that had once bound the mountains. It was not a physical lightness, for my body remained a creaking vessel of bone and aging flesh, accustomed to the endless hours of labor and the relentless chill of the stone. Rather, it was an internal transcendence, a feeling as though the very essence of my being had shed a heavy, unseen shroud, leaving behind a profound and unburdened clarity. This lightness, this quiet effervescence, was not joy, nor was it sorrow. It was simply a state of being, a reflection of the cosmic indifference I now carried within me. The burdens of faith, the gnawing questions, the desperate yearning for meaning, the torment of unanswered prayers, had dissolved, leaving behind a vast open space where the impossible blue now resonated. I no longer felt the weight of judgment, nor the pressure of divine expectation. The universe, in its raw, unadorned truth, simply was, and I, Brother Thomas, was now a small, quiet witness to its ceaseless, unheeding dance. My steps through the monastery corridors, once a soft scrape against the cold stone, now felt lighter, almost buoyant. My hands, though still engaged in the familiar rituals of copying and communal tasks, moved with a subtle grace, a quiet precision that seemed to echo the intricate, indifferent patterns of the natural world. The other brothers, though still oblivious to the profound shift within me, seemed to respond to this subtle change. Brother Anselm, his cough still deep and persistent, would sometimes offer a faint, almost imperceptible nod as I passed, as if sensing a quiet peace that transcended the familiar anxieties of monastic life. The air in the scriptorium, thick with the scent of aged parchment and ink, seemed to hum with a new, almost imperceptible energy. The sunlight streaming through the narrow, high windows no longer felt like a benevolent blessing, but simply the raw, unblinking gaze of a distant, indifferent star, illuminating the dust motes dancing in its silent cosmic ballet. I felt no torment, no gnawing doubt, only a profound, quiet acceptance of this new reality. My old faith had not returned. It had been replaced by a vast, open space, filled with the resonant hum of the impossible blue. The lightness extended even to my dreams, which, though still vivid and unsettling, now held a different quality. The vast, indifferent stars burning in the cosmic dark no longer filled me with terror, but with a quiet, almost reverent awe. I would wake with a quiet awareness of the profound silence that permeated my cell, a silence that was no longer empty, but filled with the resonant echo of the universe's ceaseless, unheeding turning. It was a freedom terrifying in its immensity, a profound peace born not of salvation, but of an utter, unburdened indifference. The monastery, in its unchanging rhythm, was a meticulously ordered clockwork, its gears turning with an ancient, relentless precision. Prime, tercel, sext, nones, vespers, compline, each bell a quiet, insistent reminder of time passing, of rituals performed, of a faith that for me had receded into the vast, unheeding silence. Yet, since my encounter with the impossible blue, my understanding of time and routine had profoundly altered. They were no longer strictures, but mere patterns, human constructs, attempting to impose order on a universe that spun on, utterly unheeding. I observed the other monks, their lives meticulously dictated by these rhythms, and a quiet, almost wistful understanding settled upon me. Their routines were anchors, securing them to the familiar, to the comforting illusion of control. They found solace in the repetition, in the predictable turning of their days, in the comforting knowledge that each hour held a prescribed duty, a familiar prayer. For them, time was a linear path, leading inevitably towards salvation, towards a promised eternity. But for me, time had become a fluid, amorphous concept, a ceaseless, indifferent flow of energy and matter. The hours in the scriptorium, once a meticulous progression of completed pages, now felt like a timeless present. Each stroke of the quill a quiet act of participation in the ceaseless, indifferent dance of existence. The boundary between day and night, between work and rest, between prayer and mundane task, had blurred into a continuous resonant hum. The impossibility of the blue sphere had granted me a glimpse of eternity, not as a promised afterlife, but as a vast, unheeding present, boundless and indifferent. My routines, once a meticulous devotion, had transformed into a quiet act of mirroring. I moved through the monastery, performing each task with the same precision, but my intent had shifted. The pouring of water into a ewer, the sweeping of a dusty corridor, the preparing of my quill, each act was now a quiet echo of the cosmic forces I had witnessed, a small, intricate part of the ceaseless, unheeding turning of the universal wheel. There was no virtue in it, no spiritual merit, only the profound, unadorned truth of existence. The monastery clockwork, with its ancient, relentless precision, continued to turn, marking the hours for those who still found meaning in its passage. But I, Brother Thomas, now walked outside of time, suspended in a boundless present, carrying the resonant hum of the impossible blue. The bells still tolled, sharp and insistent, but their sound was merely a vibration in the air, a fleeting echo in the vast, unheeding silence that now filled every moment of my life. The illusion of predictable time, once a comforting certainty, had vanished, leaving behind a terrifying, beautiful freedom. The profound stillness that had settled upon me, the quiet acceptance of the universe's indifference, was not a silence that could remain entirely contained. Though I offered no outward sign of my internal transformation, no blasphemies, no defiance, a subtle ripple of awareness seemed to stir among the other brothers. It was not the overt scrutiny of Brother Benedict which had softened into a weary resignation, but something less direct, more akin to a quiet unease. Sometimes in the refectory, as I sat in my usual place, silently consuming my pottage, I would catch the fleeting gaze of Brother Michael, his usually jovial face etched with a faint line of perplexity. Or I would hear Brother Anselm, his voice raspy from age and chronic cough, murmur a prayer for peace of spirit as he passed me in the corridor. It was as if they sensed a profound quietude that transcended the familiar anxieties of monastic life, a peace too deep, too unwavering, to be entirely of this world or of their God. I perceived these subtle shifts with a heightened clarity, my senses honed by the encounter with the impossible blue. Their unease was not born of suspicion, but of a quiet, almost reverent awe. They were accustomed to the ebb and flow of spiritual struggles, the fervent devotion, the gnawing doubt, the moments of despair and the fleeting glimpses of grace. My stillness, however, was of a different order entirely. It was an absence, a void where the familiar spiritual turmoil should reside, filled instead by a vast resonant indifference. No one dared to question me directly, for my calm presence seemed to deflect all inquiry. My eyes, which met theirs with a quiet, unblinking clarity, reflected the vast, indifferent stars I had glimpsed, mirroring their own unspoken questions back at them. It was a silent communication, a subtle emanation of the truth I now carried, a truth too immense for human words, too unsettling for their ordered world. This quiet reverence, this unspoken unease, was a strange burden. It was a confirmation that my transformation was not merely internal, but that its subtle resonance was beginning to ripple outwards, touching the edges of their perception. I was not just Brother Thomas, the quiet scribe, but something else entirely, a phantom presence, a silent watcher, performing the sacred rituals with hands that remembered, but a heart that no longer believed in the human narratives of faith. And in the profound solitude of those quiet interactions, the silence of the monastery was no longer merely quiet, but a vast, empty space, waiting to be filled with the ceaseless, indifferent song of the cosmos. The usual quiet of the monastery was briefly disturbed by a distant rumor, carried on the thin breath of a traveling merchant who sought refuge from a late spring storm. He spoke of a new plague, far to the east, a sickness that devoured men faster than any seen before, leaving villages silent and fields untilled. He spoke of fear, of desperate prayers, of bodies piled high without proper burial. Such tales were not uncommon in our isolated world, and usually they would stir a quiet anxiety among the brothers, leading to fervent prayers for protection, for divine mercy. But my perception of this news was profoundly altered. The other monks gathered, their faces etched with concern, their voices murmuring supplications to God, seeking intervention, a shield against the creeping shadow of disease. I listened with a quiet, detached clarity, feeling no personal fear, no surge of desperate prayer. The blue sphere had shown me no benevolent hand, no divine intervention, only the ceaseless, indifferent turning of the cosmic wheel, where life and decay danced an eternal, uncaring ballet. The plague, like the famines and the harsh winters, was simply another manifestation of this indifferent dance, a natural consequence of existence in a vast, unheeding cosmos. It was not a punishment, nor a test of faith, but merely a force of nature, moving with an exquisite, unthinking precision. I felt a pang of human sorrow, a quiet ache for the suffering of those distant villagers, but it was a sorrow untainted by the desperate search for divine purpose. My heart remained calm, unburdened by the futile effort of seeking meaning where none existed. The merchant, huddled by the monastery's meager fire, spoke of the frantic efforts of priests and wise women to combat the sickness, of herbs boiled and prayers chanted, of rituals performed with desperate hope. I understood their yearning, their profound human need to impose order, to seek control in the face of chaos. But the blue sphere had granted me a glimpse into a reality where such efforts, though born of compassion, were merely tiny tremors in the vast, indifferent landscape of cosmic truth. The monastery walls, once a symbol of sanctuary, now felt like a fragile, permeable membrane, offering no true protection against the vast, unheeding forces that shaped the universe. The news of the distant plague, a small human tragedy in the immense quiet of the cosmos, merely affirmed the profound, unburdened indifference I now carried within me. My old faith had not returned. It had been replaced by a vast open space, filled with the resonant hum of the impossible blue, a truth far vaster, far more indifferent than any described in Scripture. And in the profound solitude of those quiet hours, the silence of the monastery was no longer merely quiet, but a vast, empty space, waiting to be filled with the ceaseless, indifferent song of the cosmos. The scriptorium, once a sanctuary of sacred knowledge, had become a theater of quiet irony. My hands, though still forming the elegant loops and flourishes of the Latin script, moved with a detached precision. Each stroke of the quill, each meticulously rendered illumination, felt less like an act of devotion and more like a quiet act of mirroring the intricate, indifferent patterns of the universe. I copied passages speaking of divine purpose, of celestial harmony, of God's benevolent hand guiding the stars, and a quiet internal smile would touch my lips. How carefully we crafted our illusions, our comforting narratives, to make sense of a reality far vaster, far more chaotic than any human mind could grasp. The parchment, once a sacred vessel for divine truth, now felt like a fragile, permeable membrane, separating the visible world of human belief from the profound, unheeding forces that hummed just beneath its surface. I would render every initial, every margin, every flourish with the same unwavering precision, a phantom hand performing a sacred duty while my mind drifted, free and unburdened by the words. Brother Benedict's gaze, though softened, still lingered on my work, searching for error, for a misplaced letter, a smudged ink stain, a departure from the perfect form. He would find none of those. My hands remained flawless, my execution impeccable. But he would never perceive the true nature of my quiet rebellion, the vast, empty space where faith once resided, now filled with the silent, pulsing light of an unknowable cosmos. The contrast between the words on the page and the truth I now carried was a constant internal dialogue, a silent counterpoint to the familiar cadence of our liturgy. The scent of aged parchment and ink filled the air, a familiar perfume that once spoke of devotion and timeless wisdom. Now, it merely spoke of human effort, of the relentless need to record, to categorize, to impose meaning on an indifferent world. The sun, streaming through the narrow high windows, no longer felt like a benevolent blessing, but simply the raw, unblinking gaze of a distant, indifferent star, illuminating the dust motes dancing in its silent cosmic ballet. I felt no torment, no gnawing doubt, only a profound, quiet acceptance of this new reality. My old faith had not returned. It had been replaced by a vast, open space, filled with the resonant hum of the impossible blues. And in the profound solitude of those sun-drenched hours, the silence of the scriptorium was no longer merely quiet, but a vast, empty space, waiting to be filled with the ceaseless, indifferent song of the cosmos. I was a phantom among them, a silent watcher, performing the sacred rituals with hands that remembered, but a heart that no longer believed. The meager meals in the refectory, once a simple necessity, now offered a different kind of contemplation. The pottage, thick and bland, the coarse bread, dense and unyielding, were consumed in silence, punctuated only by the scrape of wooden spoons and the occasional cough. My physical needs remained, a constant, undeniable pull towards sustenance, but my perception of them had subtly shifted, viewed now through the lens of the blue sphere. Once, food was a blessing, a gift from God, a tangible sign of divine providence. Famines, therefore, were understood as divine punishment, a test of faith, a mystery of God's will. Now the act of eating felt like a participation in the ceaseless, indifferent turning of the cosmic wheel. The grains that formed our bread, the vegetables that thickened our stew, they were simply matter, transformed by the relentless forces of earth and sun, consumed by one form of life to fuel another. There was no benevolence in it, no divine intention, only the raw, unadorned truth of existence. I observed my brothers, their faces etched with the familiar weariness of daily labor, their focus on the simple act of filling their bellies. They ate with a quiet gratitude, murmuring prayers before and after, acknowledging the divine hand they believed provided. I felt no judgment towards them, only a profound, quiet understanding of their need to infuse the mundane with meaning, to seek comfort in the ritual of thanks. But for me, the sustenance was merely a fueling of the body, a continuation of the physical form that housed the profound, unburdened indifference of my soul. The scent of boiled vegetables and stale bread, a familiar perfume in the refectory, now seemed to vibrate with a new clarity. My senses, honed by the encounter with the sphere, perceived these mundane details with a heightened awareness, a deeper connection to the raw, unfiltered presence of the natural world. Each bite, each swallow was a quiet echo of the cosmic forces I had witnessed, a small, intricate part of the ceaseless, unheeding turning of the universal wheel. There was no virtue in it, no spiritual merit, only the profound, unadorned truth of existence. The simple act of eating, once a familiar ritual, had become a quiet internal dialogue, a silent counterpoint to the familiar cadence of our daily life. The sunlight, streaming through the high windows, illuminated the dust motes dancing above our tables, a silent cosmic ballet, utterly indifferent to the human need for sustenance. I felt no torment, no gnawing doubt, only a profound, quiet acceptance of this new reality. My old faith had not returned. It had been replaced by a vast, open space, filled with the resonant hum of the impossible blue. And in the profound solitude of those quiet meals, the silence of the refectory was no longer merely quiet, but a vast, empty space, waiting to be filled with the ceaseless, indifferent song of the cosmos. The monastery garden, a small, enclosed rectangle of cultivated earth, had always offered a brief respite from the confines of the scriptorium, but now it had become a profound, almost sacred space, though not in the way our order understood sanctity. It was here, amidst the silent growth of herbs and vegetables, the ceaseless industry of bees, and the slow, patient unfolding of the seasons, that I found a new, quiet communion. My walks through the garden were no longer brief duties, but solitary pilgrimages. I would wander amongst the rows of nascent life, my eyes scanning the intricate patterns of a spider's web, the delicate unfurling of a new leaf, the relentless, patient journey of a beetle across a sun-warmed stone. These were not symbols of divine creation, but stark, unadorned manifestations of the ceaseless, indifferent dance of existence. The blue sphere had shown me no grand design, only the raw, unfiltered presence of forces that sculpted galaxies and stirred the dust beneath my feet with equal, unheeding precision. I would kneel by a patch of thyme, its small, fragrant leaves a vibrant green against the dark earth, and feel the subtle currents of energy that bound all things together. The hum of the impossible blue, resonating deep within my bones, seemed to find its echo in the silent, vibrant pulse of the growing plants. It was a language spoken not in words, but in the raw, unfolding truth of existence, utterly devoid of the benevolent hand I had once believed in. There was no virtue in this communion, no spiritual merit, only the profound, unadorned truth of being. The scent of damp earth and burgeoning life, mingled with the low hum of industrious bees, filled the air, a heavy, drowsy perfume that seemed to lull the world into a state of profound, indifferent somnolence. My senses, honed by the encounter with the sphere, perceived these mundane details with a heightened awareness, a deeper connection to the raw, unfiltered presence of the natural world. Each breath, each quiet movement, was a small, intricate part of the ceaseless, unheeding turning of the universal wheel. The other monks, when they entered the garden for their own duties, seemed distant, their voices muffled by the profound stillness that now enveloped me. They saw only the neat rows of herbs, the promise of harvest. They did not see the vast, open space where faith once resided, now filled with the silent, pulsing light of an unknowable cosmos. I was a phantom among them, a silent watcher, performing the sacred rituals with hands that remembered, but a heart that no longer believed. And in the profound solitude of those sun-drenched hours, the silence of the garden was no longer merely quiet, but a vast, empty space, waiting to be filled with the ceaseless, indifferent song of the cosmos. The long, slow days stretched on, each one a quiet echo of the last, a continuous turning of the cosmic wheel. The hum of the impossible blue had settled into a constant, resonant presence within me. No longer a startling revelation, but a fundamental truth of my being. My life in the monastery continued its outward rhythm, a meticulously ordered dance of bells, prayers, and parchment. Yet beneath this familiar surface, a quiet certainty had begun to take root, a subtle whisper of a future path. It was not a decision in the way men typically make them, with deliberation and conscious choice. Rather, it was an unfolding, a gentle gravitational pull towards a destination that had become inevitable since that night in the valley. The monastery, once my sanctuary, then my prison, now felt simply like a vessel, a temporary dwelling for a soul that had glimpsed realities far beyond its stone walls. The profound solitude I now carried, born of the universe's indifference, was not a burden to be shed, but a truth to be embraced, a freedom to be explored. I found myself lingering longer by the outer postern gate, the small, seldom used archway that led to the winding path into the valley. My fingers would often rest on the cold, heavy wood, tracing the familiar lines of its ancient grain. I felt no urgent need to return to the clearing, no desperate longing for another glimpse of the blue sphere. Its presence was already within me, its hum a constant resonance in my bone. But the gate, once a symbol of enclosure, now felt like a silent invitation, a threshold between the known and the unknowable. My dreams, when they came, were less unsettling now, more like quiet lessons. I saw vast, indifferent stars burning in the cosmic dark, felt unseen forces sculpting galaxies from dust and light. But there was no fear, only a profound, almost reverent awe. I would wake with a quiet awareness of the profound silence that permeated my cell. A silence that was no longer empty, but filled with the resonant echo of the universe's ceaseless, unheeding turning. This terrifying freedom, this knowing, a separation from the comforting narratives of faith, brought a strange, unsettling peace. The cold gleam of the moon, now full and bright, illuminated the monastery courtyard, casting long, stark shadows. The ancient stone walls, once a symbol of sanctuary, now felt like a fragile, permeable membrane against an infinite, eternal indifference. The stars, cold and unblinking, still watched, and the profound silence that now permeated every aspect of my life was the only prayer I now truly knew. A quiet decision, unspoken and unwritten, had formed in the deepest chambers of my soul, a decision to step once more into the vast, unheeding night. The night had deepened into its profound, still heart. The monastery, a vast shape of sleeping stone, was quiet, save for the faint creak of ancient timbers and the low, collective breathing of its slumbering inhabitants. A sliver of moon, cold and sharp, cast long, stark shadows across the inner courtyard, tracing patterns of light and darkness on the weathered flagstone. Tonight, the familiar rhythm of monastic life held a different quality for me. It was the final turning of a familiar page, the last echoing note of a song I had outgrown. I sat by my cell window as I had done so many times before, watching the stars burn with their indifferent, ancient fire. My habit, the rough wool a familiar weight on my shoulders, felt both alien and intimately known. The hum of the impossible blue, a constant resonant truth within my bones, had intensified, no longer a subtle whisper, but a profound, almost undeniable call. It was a call not to return to the source of the sphere, but to fully embrace the truth it had imparted. The universe, vast and unheeding, simply was, and I, Brother Thomas, was now a small, quiet witness to its ceaseless, indifferent dance. The monastery's silence, once a comfort, then a burden, now felt like a vast, empty space, waiting to be filled with the ceaseless, indifferent song of the cosmos. I had no destination, no plan, no preconceived notions of what lay beyond the walls, only the terrifying freedom of unknowing. The faith I had lost had not returned, nor had any new, comforting belief replaced it. Instead, I carried a different kind of peace, born of an utter, unburdened indifference. I rose from my window, my movements quiet, almost imperceptible. My eyes swept across my cell, a small, cold chamber that had housed my body and soul for 20 years. There was nothing to take, no worldly possessions, no sacred texts to preserve. My true belongings were now intangible, the profound solitude, the quiet acceptance of the universe's indifference, the constant resonance of the impossible blue. These were the treasures I would carry into the vast, unheeding night. I slipped out of my cell, my bare feet silent on the cold stone floor, moving through the echoing corridors that had once defined my world. Past the sleeping hall, a low symphony of snores and murmurs. Past the refectory, its long tables like silent waiting skeletons in the dark. The air grew colder, heavy with the scent of damp stone and the profound stillness of the mountain night. My steps were light, unburdened by purpose, guided only by the quiet certainty that now resided within me. I approached the outer postern gate, the small, seldom used archway that led to the winding path into the valley. The heavy wooden bolt, once a symbol of enclosure, now felt like a final, welcoming threshold. The moon, A cold, indifferent eye watched from the vast star-strewn sky. My new solitary journey, deeper into the strange and silent knowing, was about to begin. The heavy wooden bolt, cold and familiar beneath my bare fingers, gave a low, resonant groan as I drew it back. The sound, impossibly loud in the profound stillness of the mountain night, was like a final, unburdening sigh. It was the sound of a boundary dissolving, of a past being gently unlatched. The iron fittings, worn smooth by centuries of hands, felt strangely alive under my touch, vibrating with the silent hum that now permeated my own bones. The air that rushed in through the opened postern gate was not merely the frigid breath of winter's lingering embrace. It was the vast, untamed essence of the world beyond, raw and unfiltered, carrying the sense of distant pine, thawing earth, and something ancient and indifferent. I stepped through the archway, my bare feet meeting the cold, damp earth of the winding path. The gravel crunched softly underfoot, each tiny stone a silent witness to my departure. I did not look back. There was no need. The monastery, a hulking mass of shadows against the faint moonlit peaks, was no longer a place of sanctuary, nor a prison. It was simply a memory, a vessel that had served its purpose, a stage upon which a profound internal transformation had unfolded. The light from its few high windows was a fragile yellow glow against the vast inky blackness of the night, a human warmth that felt profoundly distant from the cold, cosmic truth I now carried. The wind, a ceaseless, indifferent breath, whispered through the skeletal branches of the trees that lined the path. It carried no judgment, no admonition, only the pure, unheeding presence of forces that sculpted galaxies and stirred the dust beneath my feet with equal, unthinking precision. The stars above, countless and cold, burned with an ancient, indifferent fire, their light pouring down like liquid silver onto the snow-dusted ground. They were not the guiding lights of scripture, but simply vast, burning orbs, going about their cosmic dance with an exquisite, unheeding precision. The postern gate swung shut behind me with a soft, final thud, a quiet click that sealed my past. The sound, muffled by the deep silence of the valley, was like a word unspoken, a promise unmade. I was no longer Brother Thomas, the quiet scribe, bound by vows and rituals. I was simply a presence, a flicker of awareness in the vast, indifferent landscape, carrying the humming secret of the impossible blue. My new journey, a terrifying plunge into the unburdened unknowing, had truly begun. The cold, raw air filled my lungs, and for the first time in many years, my breath felt entirely my own, untainted by prayer or expectation. My first steps into the valley felt impossibly light, as if the very gravity of the earth had subtly lessened its hold upon me. The ground beneath my bare feet was a tapestry of cold, damp earth, sharp gravel, and the occasional slick patch of melting ice. Each sensation was vivid, immediate, unfiltered, a raw communion with the physical world that transcended discomfort. The cold, once a persistent tormentor, now felt simply like an undeniable truth, a fundamental aspect of the universe's vast indifference. It no longer pierced me to the bone, but rather resonated with the profound stillness that permeated my being. The path, a thin, winding thread through the skeletal forest, was illuminated only by the cold, stark light of the sliver moon and the distant, unblinking stars. Shadows, long and twisting, writhed around me, taking on monstrous, fleeting forms that dissolved with each step. Once, such phantoms would have stirred a quiet fear, a superstitious unease. Now they were merely patterns of light and darkness, beautiful in their fleeting, indifferent dance, reflections of the cosmic ballet I had glimpsed within the blue sphere. The world, stripped of its divine scaffolding, appeared starker, more brutal, but also more wondrous in its raw, unfiltered existence. I felt no urgent need to seek out the clearing, to return to the source of the impossible blue. Its presence was already within me, its hum a constant resonance in my bones, a profound, unburdened indifference that filled every silent moment, every waking thought. It was a terrifying freedom, this knowing, a separation from the comforting narratives of faith. Yet it brought a strange, unsettling peace. The universe, vast and unfathomable, simply was, beyond the petty concerns of human sin or salvation. The faint, sweet scent of crushed herbs and distant rain, the indelible signature of the clearing, was a subtle perfume on the cold night air, a constant reminder of the unseen world that now permeated my very being. The solitude was absolute, deeper than any silence our monastic vows had ever imposed. No distant bell marked the hours. No murmur of prayers echoed through the cold air. There was only the ceaseless, indifferent whisper of the wind through the bare branches, the soft crunch of my feet on the earth, and the profound, unheeding song of the cosmos. I was a phantom, a small, quiet witness in the vast, indifferent landscape, carrying the humming secret of the impossible blue. Each step was a quiet affirmation of this new reality, a journey not towards a destination, but deeper into the boundless, unburdened unknowing. The cold, raw air filled my lungs, and my breath, a transient wisp of vapor, felt entirely my own, untainted by prayer or expectation. The forest swallowed me whole, its ancient silence a profound counterpoint to the distant hum that now resonated within me. The path, barely more than a deer trail, wound deeper into the valley, tangling itself amongst gnarled roots and slick, moss-covered stones. Above, the skeletal branches of the ancient trees, stripped bare by winter, formed a lace-like canopy against the star-strewn sky. The air grew heavier here, thick with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and the sharp, clean aroma of pine. It was the raw, unfiltered perfume of untamed nature, a stark contrast to the contained, familiar smells of the monastery. Sounds, too, were different here. The monastic quiet had been a human construct, a disciplined hush. The forest's silence was wild, teeming with the subtle whispers of unseen life, the rustle of dry leaves underfoot, the faint scurry of nocturnal creatures in the undergrowth, the distant haunting call of an owl. Each sound, amplified by the profound stillness, vibrated with a raw, unadorned truth. They were not divine messages, nor omens, but simply manifestations of existence in a vast, unheeding cosmos. My senses, honed by the encounter with the blue sphere, perceived these details with a heightened awareness, a deeper connection to the unfiltered presence of the natural world. I moved slowly, deliberately, my bare feet finding purchase on the uneven ground. The cold, though pervasive, no longer gnawed at my bones. It simply was a fundamental aspect of this vast, indifferent landscape. The hum of the impossible blue, resonating deep within me, was a subtle counterpoint, a quiet warmth that transcended mere temperature, a continuous song of profound and terrifying liberty. The heavy wool of my habit, once a uniform, now felt like a second skin, a rough, familiar comfort in the untamed wilderness. The trees, silent sentinels watching from the shadows, seemed to hold ancient secrets within their gnarled branches. They were not part of a divine garden, nor symbols of a sacred purpose. They simply were, rooted to the earth, reaching towards the indifferent stars, participating in the ceaseless, uncaring ballet of life and decay. I felt no fear, no apprehension, only a quiet, profound acceptance of my place within this raw, unburdened reality. The forest was not a test, nor a trial. It was simply itself, vast and unfathomable, and I, Brother Thomas, was now a small, quiet witness to its unheeding majesty. The moon, a cold, indifferent eye, watched from the vast, star-strewn sky, its light filtering through the branches, painting the forest floor in shifting patterns of silver and shadow. My journey was not towards a destination, but deeper into the boundless, unburdened unknowing. The raw, cold air filled my lungs, and my breath, a transient wisp of vapor, felt entirely my own, untainted by prayer or expectation. The profound silence of the forest was not merely quiet, but a vast, empty space, waiting to be filled with the ceaseless, indifferent song of the cosmos. As I journeyed deeper into the untamed quiet of the valley, the memory of the monastery, now a distant, faint glow on the mountain slopes, receded from my immediate perception. It was no longer a place of regret or longing, nor a symbol of confinement. It was simply a structure, a collection of stone and timber, inhabited by men who sought meaning in carefully constructed narratives, in rituals and prayers that once defined my own existence. I held no bitterness, no judgment towards them, only a profound, quiet understanding of their beautiful, necessary illusion. I thought of Brother Benedict, his meticulous mind wrestling with the unsettling stillness he had perceived within me. His genuine concern, his earnest search for a spiritual malady, was a testament to his own deep faith, his unwavering belief in an ordered, divine universe. He would never understand the truth I now carried, the vast, unburdened indifference that had replaced my yearning. His world, structured by centuries of doctrine, could not accommodate a reality that simply was, devoid of purpose or intervention. And for that I felt a quiet, almost tender compassion. His faith, though an illusion, was a shield, a necessary bulwark against the overwhelming vastness. I thought of Brother Gregory, his eyes bright with fervent devotion, his dreams filled with celestial choirs and visions of paradise. His joy, his simple, unquestioning belief, was a precious, fragile thing in a world that offered only relentless hardship. He found solace in the promise of eternity, in the benevolent gaze of his God. My own eternity, revealed by the blue sphere, was not a promised paradise, but a ceaseless, indifferent present, a boundless flow of energy and matter. I knew his path, his comforting journey towards a divine light. My path was towards a different kind of light, an unseeing, unheeding brilliance that transcended all human concepts of meaning. The sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a nocturnal bird, were the only voices I now truly heeded. They spoke not of scripture, but of raw existence, of the ceaseless, indifferent dance of life and decay. The cold, raw air filled my lungs, and the hum of the impossible blue, a constant resonance in my bones, was the only prayer I now truly knew. My past, those 2 decades within the monastery walls, was not erased, but transformed, viewed through the lens of this profound, unburdened indifference. I was free, utterly free, and the only cost was the solitude of knowing a truth too vast for human words, too unsettling for human belief. My journey through the deepening night was not guided by maps or compass, nor by the familiar stars that once held the promise of divine order. Instead, it was an unfolding, a continuous act of being guided by the profound internal hum of the impossible blue. This resonance, a subtle vibration deep within my bones, had become my true north, my only compass in a world stripped of its old meanings. It was not a voice, nor a vision, but an existential state, a profound and unburdened clarity that transcended thought or words. This was my new faith, if such a human word could still apply. It was not a belief in a benevolent God, nor in a divine plan, but a quiet, unwavering acceptance of the universe's vast, unheeding indifference. There was no judgment in this truth, no salvation, no damnation, only the ceaseless, intricate dance of existence, where galaxies spun and dust motes danced with equal, unthinking precision. The hum was the heartbeat of this reality, a constant resonant rhythm that bound all things, from the smallest insect crawling across a damp leaf, to the most distant, indifferent star burning in the cosmic dark. Every step I took, every breath I drew, felt like a participation in this ceaseless, indifferent flow. The cold, sharp air against my bare skin, the uneven ground beneath my feet, the rustle of leaves in the wind. All these sensations resonated with the profound stillness that permeated my being, a quiet echo of the boundless, unburdened unknown. My old faith had sought to impose order on chaos, to find meaning in suffering, to understand the hand of a distant, intervening God. This new state simply was, embracing the chaos, accepting the suffering as a natural consequence of being, and finding profound peace in the absence of any benevolent hand. The silence of the forest was not merely the absence of sound, but a vast, empty space, filled with the resonant echo of the universe's ceaseless, unheeding turning. It was here, in this untamed wilderness, under the cold, indifferent gaze of the stars, that I felt most truly at home. The monastery, now a faint, distant glow on the mountain slopes, was a memory of a time when I had wrestled with questions, desperately seeking answers. Now, the questions had dissolved, leaving only the profound, unburdened acceptance of what is. The hymn was my guide, my solace, my only truth. It whispered not of answers, but of unfolding, of an endless, beautiful becoming. I was free, utterly free, and the only cost was the solitude of knowing a truth too vast for human words, too unsettling for human belief. My journey was not towards a destination, but deeper into the boundless, unburdened unknowing, guided only by the silent, resonant song of the cosmos. The cold intensified as the night deepened, clinging to the skeletal branches of the trees and seeping into the very ground beneath my bare feet. The rough wool of my habit, once a familiar comfort, now felt like a thin shield against the biting air. Hunger, a dull ache in my belly, stirred within me, a familiar companion from long fasts in the monastery. Exhaustion, too, began to settle, a leaden weight in my limbs after hours of walking on uneven ground. These were the physical burdens of the world, the raw, undeniable realities of existence outside the monastery's sheltered walls. Yet strangely, these discomforts did not torment me. They simply were, like the cold, the hunger, the exhaustion itself. My body registered them, acknowledged their presence, but my spirit, imbued with the profound indifference of the impossible blue, remained untouched. The gnawing ache of hunger was not a spiritual torment, but merely a biological process, a subtle whisper from the intricate mechanism that housed my transformed soul. The cold was not an enemy to be fought, but a simple fact of existence, a constant reminder of the raw, unadorned reality that lay just beneath the veil of human perception. I thought of the other monks, their muffled complaints about the chill in the communal hall, their yearning for warmth, for food, for the brief respite of sleep. Their discomforts, born of human frailty, were often infused with spiritual meaning, interpreted as tests of faith, as opportunities for penance. My own physical sensations, however, were stripped of such narrative. They were simply vibrations in the vast, indifferent tapestry of existence, no more, no less. The hum of the impossible blue, resonating deep within me, was a subtle counterpoint, a quiet warmth that transcended mere temperature, a continuous song of profound and terrifying liberty. I continued my slow, deliberate pace through the ancient forest, my bare feet finding purchase on the cold, damp earth. My body, though weary, felt strangely resilient, unburdened by the futile effort of seeking meaning where none existed. The hunger, the cold, the exhaustion, they were merely companions on this solitary journey, part of the raw, unburdened reality I had chosen to embrace. My old faith had sought to transcend physical suffering through spiritual discipline. My new state simply accepted it, absorbed it, as another facet of the ceaseless, indifferent dance of the cosmos. The stars above, countless and cold, burned with an ancient, indifferent fire, their light pouring down like liquid silver onto the snow-dusted ground. They witnessed my journey, my quiet endurance, with an exquisite, unheeding precision. My body, though weary, was merely a vessel, carrying the humming secret of the impossible blue, a phantom presence in a world that had become both sharper and more alien, yet strangely, beautifully real. The profound silence of the forest was not merely quiet, but a vast empty space, waiting to be filled with the ceaseless, indifferent song of the cosmos. As the night wore on, a subtle shift occurred in the profound solitude of the forest. Through the skeletal branches of the trees, a faint flickering glow appeared in the distance. A human light, a tiny pinprick against the vast inky blackness. It was the light of a distant village, perhaps, or the transient gleam of a traveler's fire. A fragile beacon of human existence in the indifferent wilderness. Once, such a sight would have stirred a complex tapestry of emotions. A yearning for warmth and company, a fear of the unknown, a flicker of judgment towards those who lived outside the hallowed walls of the monastery. Now I observed it with a quiet, detached clarity, a profound indifference born of the impossible blue that hummed within me. The light was simply a manifestation of energy, a small transient flame in the vast, unheeding cosmos. The lives it illuminated, the struggles it contained, they were merely human narratives, unfolding with their own intricate patterns of joy and suffering, birth and decay, utterly devoid of divine purpose or cosmic meaning. I felt no pull towards it, no desire to join its warmth or partake in its human dramas. My journey was deeper, into a different kind of truth. Perhaps it was a family huddled together against the cold, sharing a meager meal by a flickering hearth. Perhaps it was a solitary traveler, seeking refuge from the night, his breath pluming lightly in the frigid air. I saw their lives not as sacred trials, nor as tales of redemption, but as raw, unadorned manifestations of being, fragile flickers of consciousness in a universe that spun on, utterly unheeding. The fears that bound them, of famine, of plague, of the unknown, were human constructs, necessary illusions in a world that offered no benevolent hand. My old faith had offered solace, a promise of meaning in their suffering. My new state simply accepted their existence, absorbed their fleeting joys and profound sorrows as another facet of the ceaseless, indifferent dance of the cosmos. The hymn of the impossible blue, resonating deep within me, was a subtle counterpoint to the distant human light, a quiet warmth that transcended the fleeting comfort of a hearth. The silence of the forest was not merely the absence of sound, but a vast, empty space filled with the resonant echo of the universe's ceaseless, unheeding turning. The human light, a small, fragile pulse against the boundless dark, was merely a ripple in the vast, indifferent landscape of cosmic truth. I was a phantom, a silent watcher, performing no rituals, seeking no answers, merely existing. My journey was not towards connection, but deeper into the boundless, unburdened unknowing, guided only by the silent, resonant song of the cosmos. The night deepened, reaching its nadir, the air growing still and cold, carrying the sharp, clean scent of pristine frost. Above, the sliver of moon had dipped below the distant peaks, leaving the sky an inky, velvety black, ablaze with a terrifying multitude of stars. They burned with an ancient, indifferent fire, countless and cold, each one a distant, unheeding sun in the cosmic dark. Here in the deepest heart of the untamed forest, far from any human light or sound, I felt a profound alignment, a terrifying communion with the unknowable. The hymn of the impossible blue, a constant resonant truth within my bones, now seemed to find its echo in the very fabric of the cosmos. It was no longer merely an internal vibration, but a shared frequency, a silent song of profound and terrifying liberty that resonated from the boundless void and through my transformed being. The boundaries between self and universe dissolved, leaving only a pure, unfiltered presence, a flicker of consciousness in the vast, indifferent tapestry of existence. I stood beneath the unblinking gaze of the stars, my bare feet rooted to the cold earth, my breath pluming lightly in the frigid air. There was no fear, no yearning, no desperate search for meaning, only a quiet, almost reverent awe, a profound acceptance of the raw, unadorned truth of what is. The universe did not care for my prayers, my sins, my old faith. It simply spun, a colossal, uncaring mechanism, beautiful in its raw, unadorned existence. And I, Brother Thomas, was now a small, quiet witness to that vast, unheeding majesty. This was the ultimate solitude, deeper than any monastic cell, more absolute than any vow of silence. It was the solitude of knowing a truth too vast for human words, too unsettling for human belief. Yet, it was also the ultimate freedom, a release from the relentless burden of seeking a God who no longer answered, because perhaps he had never truly been asking the questions I thought he would. The raw, cold air filled my lungs, and my breath, a transient wisp of vapor, felt entirely my own, untainted by prayer or expectation. The profound silence of the forest was not merely the absence of sound, but a vast empty space, filled with the resonant echo of the universe's ceaseless, unheeding turning. The stars, cold and unblinking, still watched, and the profound silence that now permeated every aspect of my life was the only prayer I now truly knew. This was the moment of full surrender, not to a divine will, but to the indifferent, boundless truth. My journey was not towards a destination, but deeper into the boundless, unburdened unknowing, guided only by the silent, resonant song of the cosmos. A subtle shift occurred in the vast, inky canvas of the sky. Far to the east, just above the jagged silhouette of the distant mountains, a faint, bruised streak of purple and gray began to bleed into the horizon. It was the first, tentative whisper of dawn, a cold, elegant promise of the sun's inevitable return. The stars, which had burned with such fierce, indifferent brilliance in the profound darkness of the night, now began to recede, their glittering multitude gradually diminishing as the pale light expanded. For me, this was not the sacred awakening of a new day, the blessed promise of God's light. It was simply a cosmic event, the ceaseless, indifferent turning of the celestial wheel, where light followed darkness with exquisite, unheeding precision. The rising sun, once a symbol of divine blessing, now felt merely like a distant, indifferent star, going about its cosmic dance with a cold, elegant grace. My old faith had imbued this daily ritual with profound spiritual meaning. My new state simply observed it, absorbed it, as another facet of the raw, unadorned truth of existence. The cold, raw air of the forest, which had been so sharp and immediate through the long hours of darkness, now softened almost imperceptibly, carrying the faint, clean scent of melting frost on pine needles. The silent world began to stir with tentative sounds. The reedy chirps of unseen birds, the rustle of leaves as small creatures awakened from their nocturnal slumber. These were the sounds of life, of existence unfolding, utterly devoid of divine intention or cosmic purpose. They simply were. I stood beneath the slowly brightening sky, my bare feet rooted to the cold earth, my body weary but my spirit unburdened. The hum of the impossible blue, a constant resonant truth within my bones, now seemed to find its echo in the subtle expansion of the light, the gradual warming of the air. It was a silent song of profound and terrifying liberty, a continuous melody that resonated from the boundless void and through my transformed being. The boundaries between self and universe, which had dissolved in the deepest hours of the night, now began to reform, but subtly, permeable, allowing the raw, indifferent truth to flow through me without impediment. The profound solitude remained, a quiet understanding of my place in the vast, unheeding cosmos. This was not the end of a journey, but merely the dawning of another phase, another turning of the wheel. The rising sun, cold and indifferent, would illuminate a world stripped of its old meanings, a reality vast and beautiful in its unadorned truth. And I, Brother Thomas, would continue my quiet existence, a phantom presence, carrying the humming secret of the impossible blue, utterly alone in my transformed understanding, walking deeper into the strange and silent knowing. The sun finally cleared the jagged peaks of the eastern mountains, its first full rays streaming across the valley, painting the landscape in stark, cold light. The last of the night's shadows retreated, clinging briefly to the deepest hollows before dissolving entirely. The world, now bathed in the unblinking gaze of the indifferent star, unveiled itself in its raw, unadorned truth. Every gnarled branch, every frost-rimmed leaf, every cold stone on the path was rendered with an exquisite, unheeding precision. I stood at the edge of a small clearing, my breath plumbing lightly in the crisp morning air. My body weary but my spirit unburdened. The monastery, now a distant faint silhouette on the mountain slopes, was barely visible, a fading memory against the vast unfolding landscape. It was no longer a place of regret or longing, nor a symbol of confinement. It was simply a structure, a collection of stone and timber, receding into the profound indifference of the past. The hum of the impossible blue, a constant, resonant truth within my bones, seemed to find its echo in the very light of the morning. It was not a voice, nor a vision, but an existential state, a profound and unburdened clarity that transcended thought or words. This was my new existence, my only truth, a quiet, unwavering acceptance of the universe's vast, unheeding indifference. There was no judgment in this truth, no salvation, no damnation, only the ceaseless, intricate dance of existence, where galaxies spun and dust motes danced with equal, unthinking precision. I had no destination, no plan, no preconceived notions of what lay ahead. My journey was not towards a promised land, nor a divine revelation. It was a movement, a quiet drifting through the boundless, unburdened unknowing. The faith I had lost had not returned, nor had any new, comforting belief replaced it. Instead, I carried a different kind of peace, born of an utter, unburdened indifference. I was free, utterly free, and the only cost was the solitude of knowing a truth too vast for human words, too unsettling for human belief. As the sun climbed higher, warming the cold earth, I turned and continued my walk. My bare feet found purchase on the damp ground, each step a quiet affirmation of this new reality. I was a phantom, a small, quiet witness in the vast, indifferent landscape, carrying the humming secret of the impossible blue. The forest, now vibrant with the sounds of awakening life, hummed with its own ceaseless, evident song. The sky, a boundless canvas, stretched above me, cold and unblinking, and the profound silence that now permeated every aspect of my life was the only prayer I now truly knew. My journey had just begun, deeper into the strange and silent knowing, a solitary figure in a world that spun on, unheeding, beautiful, and eternally silent.